All right, looks like we are live. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donnie B., and I am your host for this afternoon program. This is day 3, session 5 of our 2022 Defending Genesis Conference. It is a privilege to have two of my favorite young earth creationists here with me, Joe Hubbard and John Mackay, the creation guy. The topics for this session include Let's Really Dig Dinosaurs, and I love this one, the Ge-ILLOGIC column. We have a ton to cover, so we are just going to get right into the fun. I am going to hand it over to the speakers for this important session. And since Joe is going to be kicking us off here today, I'll hand it over to you, Joe. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you very, very much, Johnny, and it's always a joy to be here, and hello to everybody watching. You will notice that I'm not in my normal setup. We are actually at a big convention centre in the middle of Wales, over on the west side of the United Kingdom, and we are in the largest Christian home education. In fact, I think it's probably the largest homeschooling, home education convention in the United Kingdom, which I know is piddly compared to your massive stuff you have in the States and Canada and the like, but we still have quite a number of families here, which is wonderful. And you can also see behind me, we have various setup of dinosaurs and fossils, and if I was to pan the camera around, we have a whole museum set up and some fossils for sale and loads of resources and all sorts of stuff. We come here so that we can strengthen families, so that we can give them answers. We've been running some great programs, had some great conversations, had some great times. So it's been really, really wonderful.
Joe, I need to interrupt you, Joe. You just used a word a moment ago that the Americans, Canadians might take offense at, so I need to explain a bit of history. You told them it was a piddly little conference, and for those of you who don't know, a piddle is a tiny little bit of land, not what you're thinking. Okay, so that's
So divided by a common language, and a very and a very large expanse of water as well, but never mind. I need to be careful about some of this language sometimes, but there we go. Yes, it's a very small, that's what I meant. It's a very small conference compared to some of the great big stuff they have over in the States. But anyway, we've had a great time. We've shown out all sorts of wonderful fossils and displays, and it's been absolutely lovely. We've been able to engage with people and do evidence. And yes, there are fossils in all of the cliffs and valleys around here, so we've been able to go out and do some digging and have some fun times as well. Now, we have brought a load of fossils along with us, including dinosaur stuff, and kids, there is just a fascination about dinosaurs. Like we've been able to pull out things like this is actually a cast here, but most of the fossils we have, we try and make sure are the real thing. So we have these beautiful casts like this cast of the largest T-Rex tooth ever to be dug up. It's a pretty serious looking beast. And we get to give this to the kids and they get to hold it and touch it and feel it. And it's great fun because, I mean, at the end of the day, there's just something really connecting about being able to come up and touch and feel old things. People love it, especially fossils and especially dinosaurs. But we do have some of our own fossils, the real fossils, like this wonderful Titanosaurus vertebrae backbone. This is something that we got from the Isle of Wight in the UK. It's got some pretty spectacular bone detail. Let's see if I can hold it up to the camera there and get it into focus. It may not want to because we were in a very large room, but never mind. Oh, there we go. Yeah, there we are. Nice. It's got some really rather spectacular detail on it and the internal structure. Really very, very beautiful. And you can come up and touch and feel a real dinosaur bone. And we like to remind people that, yes, you are actually touching the actual bone that was inside the dinosaur. Because fossil doesn't automatically mean turned to stone. It can also mean permineralized. And that's what this is. Permineralized, break the word down, permeated with minerals, right? Minerals have gone into the bone, they've encased the bone, they've infilled the bone, they've preserved the bone with minerals and rock material, but the original bone is still there. That's why you can crack it open and have a look at soft squidgy stuff inside, but that's probably a discussion for another time. What I'm going to do tonight, we're going to keep the dinosaur section short, and we're going to use the dinosaur section to lead us into the discussion of of the geological column, as John calls it, and I completely agree with him with this, because that's really where the crux of the issue is. I mean, loads of creation speakers deal with dinosaurs. I know loads of creation speakers have been talking about dinosaurs on Standing for Truth, so we're going to give you a little bit of a background into the digging the things up and how you actually find them when you dig them up. But really what we need to get onto is, you find these dinosaur fossils buried all over the world in the same layer. How does that fit into a grand scheme of things when we're thinking about Noah's flood versus a geological column, which takes millions of years of deposition to lay down? So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoints very quickly and run through a few quick little bits, including a brief little update about what we've been up to in the UK, and then we'll dive straight into our dinosaur discussion. So let me see if I can get this working. Yes, I can. Excellent. And there we go. You should be able to see that up on the screen now.
Yes.
Good stuff. A reminder of our website, creationresearchuk.com. You will find links not only to our main web, and then from there you can go to our Q&A site and our YouTube channel and so on and so forth. But you can also find out about a brand new project starting in the UK, the Creation Research Centre. This is the building taken when we got our brand new keys to this building just a few weeks back, and we've put up some concept art. So this isn't how it actually looks at the moment. How it actually looks at the moment is a little bit more like this. Yes, we do have some dinosaurs. In fact, a little bit of trivia, right? When we actually got there, we realized that our giant T-Rex head that you can see on my right-hand side, your left of the screen there, it didn't actually fit inside the doorway. So what did we have to do? Well, the big pane of glass there on the left-hand side of the screen, we literally had to take that out to fit the dinosaur head through the window, or the space where the window actually was. So there you go, fun times. But we are in the middle of turning this brand new building. We've got a 10-year lease on it. We've got our 25,000 fossil and artifact collection having now been moved into it, and thank you to everybody who've stepped up to the plate to help us and support us in this. And yes, we do need much more support for this. There's how it looks like now. We have got our Creation Research Centre coming soon. We have got loads of renovation and sorting out doing in there. Yes, we do need volunteers to come and help us sort it. Yes, we do need trained people like, plumbers and electricians and builders and designers, all to come and help us as best as we can. And yes, we do need your support, both in prayer as well as in finances, so that we can continue to develop this project, because this project is not only just going to be a museum for the local area and a fossil shop, but it's actually going to design exhibits that will go eventually, certainly around the country, if not around the world. And we'll be able to do active research, some of which you'll actually hear about tonight when it comes on to John's section. Here we are in the middle of some of the renovations. We've got some great volunteers with some great skills, so praise the Lord for them, but lots of rubbish to clear up and sort out, but a pretty great collection inside nonetheless. Also a reminder, we do have Creation Conversations, goes out on YouTube every single week. We've got a pretty decent team now. It started out just with John and myself. We then added Diane and Sam, and most recently we've added Craig Hawkins. And hey, it'd be good to get Craig here on the Standing for Truth show at one time. But we don't just deal with the creation, evolution, dinosaurs, all the fun stuff. We do deal with the more controversial issues such as Allah or Christ. We've done topics in the past such as when should a Christian obey or disobey the government. We've done topics about climate change. These have all been really popular. You should really go check out, like and subscribe, and be blessed by it. All right, we're dealing with dinosaurs, and you notice my subtitle, Evidence of Rapid Burial in God's Great Beasts. Now, we're not going to deal with every topic to do with dinosaurs tonight. If we were going to try and do that, we'd be here all week, right? And quite frankly, the geological column, or the Ge-ILLOGICAL column part of tonight's presentation really is a bit more important. But as a little side note, if you do want to find out more about dinosaurs or this particular kind of stuff, we did do a 3-part series with David Reeves in the United States, one of your great presenters over there, Jurassic Ark, The Flood, and Thorny Issues. You can get them from our streaming site, you can get them from our website, you can get them from David Reeves, so go and check those out. You will find them a great blessing. And also a reminder, you can go to our main web, click on Q&A, and get loads of information there as well. All right, who said this? Beware of false science, it leads you astray. The answer? The Apostle Paul to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 20. Oh, that's a paraphrase, a John Mackay, Joe Hubbard paraphrase. But if you read your old King James version, it really does use that word science, because science is the old word for knowledge. And here recently, we've been reminding people, make sure that you understand that science, which is knowledge, is our human knowledge of the world around us. It's our human interpretation of the world around us. Beware of false science, beware of false knowledge. The Bible is emphatic. False science will lead you astray. True science, true knowledge will point you to Christ. And the other Bible verse we've been using over and over again in the last few days we've been here is Philippians chapter 2, verse 5. Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ. When you're looking at the world around you, make sure you're looking, as Christians here tonight, if you are a Christian here and watching, make sure you're looking at the world through God's perspective. So, excuse me. With that in mind, let's go to there's the United Kingdom, right? And we've travelled all over the United Kingdom. We're in Wales. We're actually a little bit further up from where that arrow is pointing. But let's go down to the Severn Bridge, down near the Bristol Channel. There's John Mackay a few years back in, this would have been 2019 or something like that. We've been there a few times together, haven't we, John? And we've got this rather spectacular cliff in the background. You see the red, you see the grey, you see how it's a perfect knife edge of a join. It's absolutely brilliant, that boundary. And geologists love it when boundaries are like this, because they know when to start. I mean, knowing when to stop is a bit more difficult. But we're at Ost Cliff. And at Ost Cliff, as you dig down deep, you can start to find some dinosaur remains. Some of these are not technically regarded as dinosaurs anymore, because dinosaurs are now regarded as creatures that live on the land, have their legs straight down underneath them, the big reptilian creatures. And the swimming dinosaurs are now classified as marine dinosaurs, as marine reptiles, not dinosaurs. The flying dinosaurs are regarded as flying reptiles, and we've sort of categorize them in different things. But that's good. That's what man's job was in the garden, right? Naming things. However, one thing's for sure, when these were all first discovered, they all had one same name, and that name was dragon. Both the Sir Richard Owen, who invented the term dinosaur in 1841, he named them dragons before, he named them dragons afterwards, and as far as he was concerned, Dinosauria was the posh scientific name, right? The Latin name or the Greek name given to them, like we have Latin and Greek used in our scientific world today. Can you see the hammer? Can you see the fossil rib? That's there, and how it curves around down to you can see where it was, a great big plesiosaur rib. Great big bits of plesiosaurus bone that you can find all throughout this area. Great big fossils of, hey, that's a fun one with the kids. We have enormous, great big pieces of this stuff that we love to show up to the kids. This is coprolite or fossil dinosaur poo, right? Great fun with the kids. But you can find this fossil coprolite actually here at Ost Cliff, next to little tiny plesiosaurus or an ichthyosaurus tooth. There's the kind of creature we're dealing with, one of the big swimming reptiles. Or you can go further along the coast, down towards the Dorset coast, and you can go into the Purbeck limestone. Can you see the footprints? This was donated to us. It's now in our museum collection. It was donated to us by one of the quarrymen. It's a rather fabulous set of pterosaur footprints, the big flying reptiles. We've now got this in pride of place in our museum collection because it's actually so spectacular. Only 3 examples we can find have actually been found or are on display rather of these fossils from the Purbeck limestone. One's in the Dorchester Museum, one's in the Natural History Museum in London, and the third and the best preserved one is with yours truly's museum project in Oswestry, the Creation Research Centre. So praise the Lord for fabulous fossil finds like this, like such a cool flying reptile. Now, as you go and look around and you dig up dinosaurs, I mean, some of the results are absolutely spectacular. Some of them are just unbelievable, the level of preservation. But here you can see a rather nice dinosaur that's been dug up and it's been reconstructed. Of course, some of this is going to be, plastic and resin and so on and so forth. But it's been reconstructed back in the way that it possibly would have looked when it was alive. Yes, there's a lot of interpretation that goes on here. But the question is, how do you actually find these dinosaurs? Because you don't find them preserved in the rock like this, not in the slightest. Now, you can come with me to the Isle of Wight. The Isle of Wight is the 6th best place in the world for diversity of dinosaur fossils. It's been collected from dinosaur fossils for about as long as dinosaurs have been known in the modern era. Pretty spectacular cliffs, pretty spectacular rocks, pretty spectacular fossils. Of course, you have to get up and into some rather hairy looking situations sometimes if you want to find the coolest fossils. This was on my first geological trip to the Isle of Wight many, many years ago. You can see I'm looking a lot younger there, but we found some pretty spectacular stuff. In fact, one of our best finds from the Isle of Wight was actually when John and I were there together back in 2019, and we found what we're pretty sure was the back of a dinosaur skull. Pretty cool stuff. And we were able to dig part of it out. It was pretty spectacular. And of course, because you're dealing with fossils, which the word fossil means simply in a hole, and the best place to find a hole in the United Kingdom anyway is to go to the coast, because we're a nice little island, right? And the sea's done all the work for you. But you are, of course, at the mercy of the tide. So you do find yourself in some interesting situations late at night, 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to dig up a dinosaur. And of course, you get the spectacular fossil footprints of these dinosaurs as well, the trace fossils. Yeah, fossil dinosaurs found all over the world, pretty spectacular. Kids love them. But what do they look like when you dig them up? You see, when you dig up these fossils, you should be asking yourself some questions. And yes, we lead fossil field trips all around the world. We're leading a fantastic convention down to Dorset later on this month, and we will get people to ask questions like this. How do dinosaur fossils form? What evidence do they show? Do they show evidence of millions of years and a slow burial, or do they show evidence of a quick flood burial? Well, let's go to the world's outdoor creation research museum and fossil dig site in Australia. There's Australia, there's the dig site, there's Jurassic Ark. There's Daryl and Clem and James and a dinosaur. The dinosaur's the one in the hat, by the way. And we have some rather fantastic fossil drowned dinosaurs. Drowned? Oh yes, drowned for sure. You see the funny position it's in? Head bent backwards, tail over the head, legs squashed up underneath. This is actually a Coelophysis dinosaur from Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. And if you go to the Natural History Museum in London, you find they also have one here from Ghost Ranch in New South Wales from Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, not New South Wales. Now, here's the standard story that they will tell you if you go to a museum, look in a book of how a dinosaur fossil dies and gets buried and becomes a fossil. Step number 1, the dinosaur collapses and dies. Step number 2, the flesh rots away and the bones remain. Step number 3 and step number 4, very gradually the bones become buried and very gradually the bones become fossilized. And eventually, after large periods of time, that erosion begins to expose the dinosaur skeleton. In other words, the point that you will see in museums and books and reports around the world is that fossilization, that is from creature to a fossil, is a very slow process. Now, we'll be talking about some of this later, but let's have a look at dinosaurs for now. And a reminder for those of you who are Christians here, Scripture actually tells you to test all things and hold fast to what is good. So let's do some testing now. Let's go to the southern Alberta Badlands. Let's look at a pretty spectacular dinosaur fossil. Now, this is how you dig the dinosaurs up. They're not in a standing position, they're in this position. And as I had one young lady say to me today, hey, look, it's doing a ballerina pose. Yeah, fun stuff sometimes, but what is actually going on here? The neck is bent back, mouth is open, tail's arched over the back, legs are squashed up underneath. There's another one from the same area, same position. There's a Gorosaurus, same position. I mean, look at the serious neck. In fact, we have a cast of this very fossil in our museum collection. In fact, I've brought it here today. It's just over there. Pretty spectacular fossil. But look at that neck. That's a pretty serious bend of the neck there. What is going on here? But it's not just in the southern Alberta Badlands. This is an example from Germany. Mouth open, head bent back, tail bent over the head, legs squashed up underneath. Here's one from Italy, same position. Here's one from Nigeria in Africa. I mean, look at the curvature on that spine. It's pretty serious. This is, well, what's going on here? New Scientist, sort of a layman's magazine of recent scientific discoveries. Here's a report that they did a little while back. These dinosaurs are found with their head and their neck bent backwards and their tail arched over their back. Immersion in water is the simplest explanation. In other words, these dinosaurs drowned. You can go one step further. You can have a look at Daspletosaurus from Canada, and you can see what they say in their secular museum. Here's a Daspletosaurus. It's got the classic death pose that's really common amongst these dinosaurs, and it's an indication of a central nervous system trauma at the time of death related to drowning. Now, we actually had a medical biologist here today, and she found this absolutely fascinating because she'd studied drowning, and she said this is exactly what happens even to us. It's a tense muscle. Your muscles and your ligaments are connected together in such a way that when you have a surge of electricity flow through your spinal cord, your muscles tense and you will curve up. Now, of course, we as humans, we don't curve up quite as drastically as a dinosaur, but then we don't have quite as long a neck or a long as tail. But if you do, you will find you'll be in exactly that same position. And here is a picture of some dinosaurs drowning. And no, it's not a picture that we've commissioned one of our artists to draw of dinosaurs drowning in Noah's flood. This is in Dinosaur Provincial Park. Of no friend to the Bible, no friend to a creationist, yet even they cannot actually deny the evidence that these dinosaurs drowned and got buried in a flood. These are flood, fossil, drowned dinosaurs for sure. They've been found drowned all over the world in the same rock layers, the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. Oh, Cretaceous, named after the Latin word for chalk. Jurassic, well, we'll come on to Jurassic a little bit later. Okay, one final point. Research has shown that these dinosaurs had to be buried within 3 minutes or otherwise they'd revert back to a natural pose. Now, when you have a central nervous system trauma, it flows through your body. That shock of electricity goes through your spinal cord, flows through your body, and you tense up. You're trying desperately to get that last breath of air. You're going, and if you don't get that last breath of fresh air, you die. And once you're dead, you're dead. You have no control over your muscles. And you actually have a few minutes in which your muscles would start to relax, your head would flop over, your tail would go down, you would no longer be in that pose, and you'd have about another 30 minutes before rigor mortis sets in and the blood drains to one side of the body and you go stiff again. In other words, if you want to preserve these dinosaurs in this unique position, you have to be buried within 3 minutes. Now, that's pretty quick. So to recap, we've found these dinosaurs drowned. They're found all over the world. They've been buried in water very rapidly, found all over the world in the same layers, starting to sound a lot like a worldwide flood. Now, the evidence really is there when you look for it, and as we like to remind people, there are many theories, opinions, hypotheses, and ideas that contradict every single word in the Bible, but the facts never actually do. Now, I believe I'm going to finish up just about there. Yeah, there's some of our Jurassic Ark stuff. We've recapped that. There we are. Here's the final point. It's got absolutely nothing to do with time, but everything to do with a process. Yes, process is key. But what process? But maybe we'll come on to that a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing. A reminder, go and grab our Dinosaurs Down Under DVDs, or if you want to stream, you can go and stream them from our website, Creation Research Live. I'm sure we'll have some time for questions, but ultimately, we really need to get onto the question of, all right, these dinosaurs are found all over the world in the same rock layers. How does that fit in with the standard geological column? How did these layers actually form in the first place? What could have actually swept all these dinosaurs together and drowned them? And how on earth would you get a set of fossils like this beautiful? Well, I wonder what this is. Maybe we'll come on to that a little bit later. It's polished, it's shiny, it looks pretty spectacular, but really it's excellent evidence of flooding, flowing waters that bury things very, very fast. Well, I'll leave it there. John, Donnie, over to you.
To Diane Eager, she and I are actually in Tasmania in the same room at the moment. And since the biblical record requires the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, I'm going to ask Diane to come and confirm that you actually quoted her accurately about drowning in your conversation you had over there. So, Diane, would you like to come and sit in my chair while I turn the heating down? We're in Tasmania, by the way. It's much closer to the South Pole than most of Australia is. So, Diane, come over here and take over for the moment while I find find the heating switch and turn it off and confirm what Joseph said about drowning.
You're melting in the heat there, John. Hello.
Hello.
Good morning, Diane.
Good morning. Yes, it is morning here in Australia. And I think we're in 3 fairly widely spread time zones at the moment, aren't we?
Yeah.
Joe in the UK and you in North America and Canada. Yes. Yes, that story from New Scientist, we reported that in our newsletter that we send out as a regular email, but we also archive all of the science report items that we have, so people can look up that. It's on a website called the Creation Fact File, and it's just an archive of all of our little science news snippets. You don't need to know when it was sent out. You can just do a keyword search and look it up. But it was interesting that people have noticed this really interesting phenomena with these dinosaurs all over the world, all different kinds of dinosaurs caught up in this particular pose, and they did a few interesting experiments with dead birds and other things that you really don't want to know about, but you can go and read the original report in New Scientist if you like. But they came to the conclusion that drowning in or immersion in cold water explained this particular pose the best, but they tried various other methods of drying things out in sand and other options for what you can do with dead birds and dead reptiles. But sudden immersion in cold water was what produced the results.
Okay, Diane, just as I take my seat over,
Yes.
I'll stand behind you
Oh,
for a moment.
Diane, while you're there, can I ask you a question? Because I'd like you to confirm something for me. My doctor told me that jogging could add years to my life. I think he was right. I feel 10 years older already.
Yes, that's another well-known phenomenon.
Well, Diane, just while we've got you briefly, yes, medically, what Joseph said is what happens. The New Scientist reported it. It's been widely experimented with. But you and I are actually here in Tasmania for a particular reason. What is it? What are we here for the opening of?
We are here for the opening of another creation museum. It's in Tasmania, in Launceston, and or near Launceston, at a place with the fabulous name of Beauty Point. It's just next to a seahorse farm, and our colleague Craig Hawkins actually runs the seahorse farm. So fascinating things to see if you come to Tasmania. We started this museum a few years ago, but then when the world was shut down and no one was allowed to travel anywhere, and particularly not to Tasmania, it had to sort of tick along quietly in the background. But now people are free to travel here, so come to Tasmania and come to see the Creation Centre here, and you will see lots of wonderful evidence for Noah's flood. In fact, that's one of the things they're concentrating on, evidence for Noah's flood, and there's some fascinating evidence there, as well as some fabulous fossils to see.
Okay, if you want to grab the other seat, Diane. We're actually in Craig's place. Sorry, Diane.
And they have a great wine region called the Tamar Valley.
They do. You want to get smart, you go right there. What you'll find is we're in Craig's basement at the moment in his office, and all the kids upstairs, the family, have been told, don't run along the floor and don't play with your internet because it'll mess up all of our broadcasts. So there's a price being paid for us being here in the office here down under in Australia. Okay, so we've looked at dinosaurs. It's a phenomena that, I mean, this evidence of water burial of dinosaurs, even on one of the dinosaur digs I did in Australia, the erosion had produced the bones flopping out, so you couldn't see the curved structure in the land-dwelling dinosaur. But what was interesting, and I got Joe to confirm this, we found 2 sorts of dinosaurs buried together that were indicative of drowning. Can you remember what the expert said we found, Joe?
Where was that? Sorry, John?
This is here in Australia, the big dinosaur bone.
Oh, yeah.
Take to England and get confirmed.
So he said that we showed him a few different examples of the bones which you found. And there was definitely a large Titanosaurus, so one of the big long-necked
That's the
ones,
biggest one, isn't it?
the big long-necked ones. And there was also one of the big marine dinosaurs, so the big swimming marine reptiles, right? So it was interesting because you found these in pretty much the same place, didn't you?
Right
And
beside each other.
Yeah, so you've got giant land dinosaurs buried next to giant marine reptiles. So that's indicative of a flood for sure. But you were the one who actually went out there and dug them, John. What positioning were they in?
Well, they were actually in the Cretaceous too, which is interesting. And Cretaceous, as you said, is reference to chalk, but we've got a whole big artesian basin full of Jurassic and Cretaceous and Triassic. And those are the words that sort of are thrown around with tags like millions of years and Darwin's evolution tagged all the way through it. So hence, it's not just important to talk about dinosaurs or even how they died, while people still think they could have died over millions of years, or they could have died and the whole continent's moved. And you end up with this story based on what is perceived to be a real geological history of the world based on the layers of rocks. So you've already told them Cretaceous. Where does that word come from, Joe? Remind them again.
So Cretaceous, the Latin word for chalk is creta, and so Cretaceous means the chalk rocks. Now, you will find that a large majority of Cretaceous rocks are chalk in the United Kingdom. Now, that's not to say the same around the world, but it's an important point because you do need to understand your history and really where the whole geological column came out of. But maybe that's for John to speak about later, but it's important to recognize that Cretaceous named after the chalk rocks which are found here in the United Kingdom, back at the time when the British Empire covered a quarter of the globe and back when the birth of sort of modern geological thinking was coming about with the names of George Smith, William Buckland, Charles Lyell, James Hutton, and the like. So pay attention to that.
So in England, you could own a piddle of Cretaceous land. You could also, if you had the bottom corner of the churchyard and it was shaped like a triangle, you could have a gore. So an Al Gore on a piddle of land in England really does make sense if you trace your names back as well. The Cretaceous goes back all the way to the Latin, and we use those sort of languages in geology particularly and in general science because it's a dead language and it doesn't change, unlike other words that Joe used today. Okay, Donnie, do you want to throw it up just a brief for questions at the moment on this subject before we move on to the application of the Ge-illogical column?
Absolutely. We can just take one or two and then we can get right into the geologic column, as that is a very important topic. And I understand we could do another full conference just on that one. So here's a question or objection that came in from Cyber Hex. Thank you for the question. And they ask, would not your biblical flood have all fossiliferous strata containing a mix of fossils? However, instead, we see certain species that are confined to certain strata and not in others.
Okay, you need to be careful when you're out there collecting fossils and trying to reach those conclusions that you stop yourself going in a circle. Because when you say, I find this layer and I call it Cretaceous, originally it would have been because it was chalky, but by the time you come out to Australia and you find the dinosaurs with me, you don't call it because it's chalky, because it isn't. You label it because of the sorts of fossils you find in it, and we'll deal more with that later. But once you start labeling layers according to the fossils that you find in it, then all of a sudden you start a big circle, and I can see that Joe has gone to get himself some specimens there. So Joe, take over with that question because it's been very important in the work you're doing, even for your university.
Absolutely. Okay, starting off in university, the basic principle in paleobiology is you work out ecosystems based off of the fossils that you find in the layers. So if you go and you want to find, determine what is the Purbeck limestone, you'd go and look at the fossils that you find in it and say, well, this must have been a shallow marine environment. Of course, it's full of shells. And then you find, well, hang on a minute, it's actually got some flying things in it as well, so it doesn't quite start to add up. And you go to Lyme Regis, and I've been down at Lyme Regis on a secular geological field trip, and they say this is clearly a shallow sea because it has loads of marine creatures in it. Of course, you have to then start asking the questions, well, what about the fact that you also find squashed dinosaurs? buried next to seashells inside these layers. That is an example of mixed environment. But even more prominent than the fossil dinosaurs that you find at places like Lyme Regis, and this will be one of the things that we will be taking people around. You can come and dig stuff up like this yourself. Here we have a fossil example from Lyme Regis. You can see the curly whirly ammonites. The ammonites are, as far as we can tell, a deep sea creature, very similar to the modern day nautilus. They're a shelled cephalopod or a shelled squid-like creature. And then in the middle there, you can see the fossil wood, the fossil timber. Now, this timber is so well preserved, we know exactly what kind of wood it is, what kind of tree it's from. It's from one of the Araucarias or the southern conifers. John, you're very familiar with them. Here in the UK, we can only get the South American variety to grow. We call it monkey puzzle tree. But what you have here, I mean, this is just a small handheld specimen that I bring around with me, but the reality is this is found in abundance. Huge, great big trees and logs buried next to fish and buried next to deep sea creatures. You're looking at evidence of a mixed environment. You're not looking at species of trees in one place and dinosaurs with them and species of fish in another place. You're actually looking at a mixed flood environment for sure. And these examples are not rare, they are the norm. We have another little handheld specimen here. Let's see if I can get that into focus. If I can cover up my face, that might work. There you are. You've got the wood down the bottom and the curly whirly ammonite up at the top. Again, example of a mixed environment. So when you actually go out there and start digging it up, be wary of just going into museums and seeing the nicely displayed fossils that show evidence for evolution and evidence for the geological column, because we have 25,000 fossils in our museum and we have a brand new, very large building to put them on display, but even that building can't hold them all on display, right? And so we have a troubled time working out what things we're going to put on display and what things we're going to store. And it turns out every single other museum on the planet has that problem as well. And a little while back, they've all decided that they will be displaying is fossils and evidence that supports the current thinking in science. So if you want to have a current thinking in science that supports a geological column in millions of years, you're not going to necessarily put stuff on display that goes against that. So that's why we encourage people to actually go out and do research. That's why we encourage people to come on our field trips and actually dig these things up and see the evidence for themselves.
Joe, are you saying therefore that the mixed environments is the norm?
Mixed environments is 100% the norm, no matter where we go. And in fact, I think you might even touch on this later, John, but even as far down as the Ordovician, right? 40 odd million years before plants were supposed to have evolved, we found fossil plants buried next to seashells. It doesn't matter whether you're up in Tennessee and dealing with the coal and the shale there, you can find marine creatures. In fact, I think you found a horseshoe crab buried next to some coal seams up there. So it really is the norm when it comes to this, and it really does pay to go out there and see and dig around, and it really does pay, and we're so grateful that with both myself and even more to an extent John has been able to travel the world and actually see this evidence for ourselves.
Yes, I'd encourage people who are listening to tonight's subject, not only do we have great resources on dinosaurs, which you can get with streaming or get some of our books even for kids, but if you want some technical stuff, a man who was a big influence on me was Professor Derek Ager. Now, I'd basically reached conclusions that agreed with him before I read his book, but if you want to start with his book on geologic column or on the stratigraphic record or on new catastrophism, he was a standalone guy who had a lot in common with me. He didn't just lecture in the university. He didn't just work in 2 or 3 mines in his life. He traveled the globe and compared A with B with C, Alaska with Indiana, with North America and with England and with Europe, and said, hey, look, guys, here's what you see everywhere. So I'd recommend the new catastrophism. I'd recommend the stratigraphic record by Professor Derek Ager. And he did not like people like Joe or Donnie or George. In fact, his introduction to his last book is that I don't want creationists quoting this book, because it actually falls into our lap. And he also said one other thing. The old catastrophists, that's people like Joe, people like me, who talk about the catastrophe of Noah's flood, were the objective geologists. The uniformitarian followers of Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin were the non-objective. right? Go out and confirm what he says. So good question, and thanks for asking it. But if you try to find a fossil layer of only platypus or a fossil layer of only leaves, I'm sorry, within probably 20 feet, 10 meters or so, we'll find evidence that will shoot that whole argument to pieces. So, okay, Donnie, probably time we moved on from that one.
The other important point, John, to reinforce the not time but process argument is the fact that we find carbon-14 and soft tissue with these fossils. Now, we know as science believers that oxygen is an oxidizing agent. So quick burial is important. Also, I think we've mentioned this before about the water mold and the other creatures that literally eat any flesh, even the bones, within a year. So that's important to note, that it is the process, and it has to be quick burial to ensure that those specifics are actually preserved.
That's certainly true, George. And the comment we just had on screen about lots of horseshoe crabs on the beaches in Florida, excuse me, yes, totally agree with you, and have some of them in my museum. But the one place you would not expect to find horseshoe crabs is where I found mine buried in the coal seams of Tennessee. And not far up the road, there's a fossil shark in the coal. Right now, if you think of coal as a swamp and all of these things, you shouldn't have horseshoe crabs buried with ferns, buried with carbonized material, buried with sharks. That's, if you just superficially look at the coal, it looks like a uniform black lot of coal. You dig it up and burn it. But if you carefully check what's in it, you will be absolutely staggered at the mixed environment that it actually is. It's just that we dig things up with huge, big diggers these days. So I don't even waste my time going to those coal mines, because there's nothing left except where the big digger is dug. You need the old-fashioned pick and shovel to actually get there. All right, proceeding on with one thing here. I brought in a couple of specimens from Craig Hawkins' little collection behind me. Can you see this lovely brachiopod? Okay, now some people call it the angel wing brachiopod. It's delightful. And you say, how do you know it's a brachiopod? Well, they're still here. We have plenty of living fossil brachiopods. So from the time that was laid down, whatever strata you think it's in, up to the present. And see, that's the objective statement. From that layer up in the hills of Tasmania, right to the present in Bass Strait, where you'll still find some of them living, you find they are still brachiopods. They may not have as long a wings or as shorter or as fat or whatever, but they are still recognized brachiopodus. That's their name. Podus means foot. Brachy refers to sort of gill structures and things like that. And I have another one here. Joe, you're watching, so you actually identified that correctly. What was it?
I think that is one of the lovely bryozoans, and I think that's one of the ones that you get from down in Tasmania, isn't it? I'm sure we saw some of those down there when we were there.
It is.
Yeah.
We took you out into that quarry that afternoon, that wet, miserable afternoon, remember, where the black, smudgy, gudgy stuff was, and there were plenty of both the shells and the Phanerozoic. The bryozoan. Bryozoan, by the way, folks, means matte coral. In the present day world, you find it on the barrier reef. It just grows over the top of things. It's got little windows in it. So this specimen is called Phanerozoic, or window creature. Old fenestra rather, from Latin for window. So this is a Phanerozoic, and it's one of the bryozoans, or the matte corals, that grows over the bottom of the barrier reef area. Now, the reason I bought these is that Craig is collecting a whole big specimen show of Permian rocks. This is classified as Permian. Okay, Permian, that's one of the words you come across in geology. No, so far we haven't got any dinosaurs in Permian rocks, but perhaps we've been caught in a circle, because if you find a dinosaur there, it's supposed to be Triassic, Cretaceous, or Triassic. We get caught with labels sometimes, but the original name was coming from a little bit of politics. The Russians had a town that was called Perm, and the Russian Tsar had sent a request to his cousin on the English throne, please send me an expert. So he was sent an expert who went over to Russia, Charles Lyell, by the way, And when they actually looked at the rocks there, they identified a new grouping they weren't aware of, and they named it after the town. The town was Perm, the area became Permian. And once they defined what that group of rocks included, the fossils defined what the rocks are. Yes, you've heard creationists, I'm sure, criticize the logic of if you name the rocks after the fossils and the fossils after the rocks, you go round and round and round. And you actually do. I still remember doing excavation in a Permian quarry. Yes, they're up and down the coast of Australia. This bed, by the way, is enormous. You can find it in Tasmania. You can find it in New South Wales. You can find it in Queensland. If you want to see some of that for yourself rather than just me holding specimens, go and have a look at our Darwin on the Rocks series, right? We actually took a team all over the planet. Yes, that's expensive. Yes, we find out how much budget David Attenborough's got because he does it way, way more sophisticated than we do. But what he doesn't do is tell you the truth. He tells you the propaganda about millions of years of rocks. But here's where it shows up. I took a group, a homeschooling group, mums, kids, a couple of dads, into a Permian quarry. And they were having a wonderful time digging up the fossils, ones like this. Because you see, this still lives on the Barrier Reef, so it's no help to evolution. The Brachiopoda are still here, and most of the hundreds of varieties are now extinct. We can't find them living anywhere. Again, no help to the theory of evolution. Brachiopods have turned into brachiopods. The Permian bryozoans have turned into bryozoans that are still identical on the Barrier Reef today. And this lady wanted to know how old the rocks were. And I said, well, it's Permian rock. Yes, but that's its name. How old is it? And I said, well, in the textbook, look it up. And she looked it up, and it was hundreds of millions of years old. And she said, well, how do they get that? I said, well, you might find this hard to believe, but they date the rocks by the fossils that are in them. Yes. So they're saying these phenostella are hundreds of millions of years old. Yes. And how do they know that? I said, well, if you kept turning the pages, you'd find that they date the fossils by the rocks that they're in. And she said, don't be stupid. They've just gone around a big circle. I had to smile. You see, I sat all through this at university. And after about 3 or 4 years, you begin to see you've gone from A to B to A to B to A to B. And just at that time, a professor from the local university turned up with a group of university students. And I said, listen, you've got an opportunity to do that verse that Joseph and I love. Test all things. Only keep the things that are true. If I'm telling you the truth, here's what I want you to do. Go up to that professor and ask him how old the rocks are in the quarry. Now, I suspected she would back down. But being as bold as brass, she went over and she asked this professor. And then she came back looking very downcast. I said, what did you find out? Well, he said the rocks are Permian. And then I said, how old are they? And he said, well, the textbooks say they're several hundred million years old. And I said, well, how do they know that? And he said, because of the fossils. And how do they know how old the fossils are? Well, they're found in Permian rocks. And then she looked at me and she said, they're stupid. Now, I didn't do that just to poke fun at the professor. He was doing exactly what I would have done when I finished university, because all you've heard is A, B, and nobody points out that you've gone around in a big geological circle. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do quite a bit of background thinking because, as I said to Donnie when we started and Joe, we agreed, we've got so many years of putting stuff together, digging up fossils from Alaska to the edge of Antarctica and putting it all together. 3 museums worth now. It's just fabulous stuff. But putting it in a teaching session, we've probably got enough for weeks. So we're going to do, I guess you could say, probably parts 1 and 1A today. But here's how we're going to do it. So, Joe, are you listening? Are you
absolutely
listening, Joe?
Absolutely, I am.
Because this dinosaur here actually has never used this program here in Tasmania before. So I have to get my PowerPoints up. So I've got your screen on. I can press my PowerPoint button there. Right now, where do I go from here, Joe?
So is your PowerPoint up on full screen in front of you?
My PowerPoint, I can do that. That's fairly easy. Let's get that there. Okay, from the current slide. Look at that. I can read English even. That's full up on the thing. Now, I need to find a share button, don't I?
Right, now if you've got your PowerPoint in full screen in front of you,
Yep.
you want to press your Windows key and click on your browser to bring this screen back so you can see all of us.
Okay. There we are. Now share.
Okay. Then you click on share, which is down in the bar at the bottom.
Yeah.
It just says share. Then go to window. Or you want to share screen.
There we are.
Yeah.
And
go to window, select your full screen presentation, and we should be away.
all right, share. There we are. Are we on now?
Yes, looks good. Looks great.
Okay, that's good. All right. I've done on this program several issues about this, and this was stimulated not only by my observations, but by a comment by my professor, a very famous professor, head of the department, right? He came in and he changed everybody's thinking from geosynclinal theory about how rocks off the oceans formed, etc., to you'd have to say continental drift. But he was very influential. And he made a comment in class one day that said the rocks in the Grand Canyon formed horizontally. They form sideways. They age from one end to the other. They don't age from the bottom to the top. Now, there's not the professor. That's one of our old workers who's now died, gone to be with the Lord, lovely Christian man. And he offered his time free of charge to build us the experimental equipment you're looking at. What is it? It's a tiny strata machine, the first one we ever did. The top, we put the sediment in, the lever we sort of pulled to let it out. We ran water from one end to the other, and we've devolved or evolved this over the years. We've expanded it, got rid of the lever, put some guys in charge, let them play with mud and water, and we even had Joseph out there playing with it with our last really big open day in 2018, PC. Remember PC pre-COVID? Right, that was our version 6 of the strata machine. And well, we've summarized this for you because you can see this on quite a few of our presentations. The stuff at the bottom is in layers because it's waterproof ply, you know, marine ply. But the heavy stuff at the top has come in as black, white, black, white, black, white. And yes, it did it while everybody was watching. Joseph, do you remember how long this process took? Was it months?
When I was there, it was about 15 minutes, if that.
Yeah.
I know you've improved the machines and more water and more speed, but yeah, when I was there, 10 to 15 minutes. It was basically a short enough amount of time that you just had enough time to explain what was going on and the process behind it while it actually worked. And so it actually was a pretty good timing. But yeah, 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes at the most.
Now, the black minerals are mineral sand. The white sand is ordinary river sand, and they've been all mixed up and then washed through the water out of the machine, and the machine automatically puts them in layers, and the layers grow sideways. My professor was right, but he never explained it, never gave any references, just made a comment and left it. There's a Frenchman, Guy-ILLOGIC, who really majored on this, and you can read up his work, and we'd recommend that. He's not too popular amongst circles, particularly amongst the geological circles, who think he's, well, if his work is true, it applies to deltas only. Well, there's what we cut open for people to see. You can see the sand. Yes, this is in our strata machine, and it's version number 6 or 7. Can you see the cut we've made there? And if you're wondering where you've seen that before, then the answer is there. My professor, by implication, would end up agreeing with Guy-ILLOGIC, at least in principle, if not in practice. And if you believe the layers in the Grand Canyon got old sideways or grew horizontally, then the kids aren't looking at millions of years of evolution in the rocks at all. Because the Grand Canyon, and I'll keep telling people this, I've climbed it many times, which is great exercise, keeps me moderately healthy in my middle to old age, does not represent vertical time, but horizontal process. It's why you can find grains of zircon from Tennessee in the rock layers in the Grand Canyon. And if it took millions of years to get there, sorry, the grains would have worn down to nothing. But they are there in the Coconino and some of the other places. Going from the little strata machine, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, let's go for a bigger strata machine out in the real world. Yep, I'm out in the edge of the desert in South Australia, New South Wales border. Look at all that sand. There's yours truly. Oh, you see it's a dry creek? This creek, according to the locals, we checked with the chief land inspector, we checked with all the people who lived around, well, there's only a few of them who were actually there, and they were emphatic. This creek only flooded for a couple of days, then it was dry for the rest of the year. Yours truly in the middle of winter, out digging holes. Yes, look at that. When the hole is excavated, can you see the layers? Black, white, quite amazing. Minerals from the rocks upstream and the sand from the granitic rocks had ended up in layers. Look at that. There's my colleague Daniel's hand. He works at one of the mines around there, and you have black, white. But this is an enormous strata machine, and it's not rigged by us. These were just added what you'd call randomly, but then they were sorted according to the properties of the water. Okay, black, white, layer. And it works not just in a little strata machine, it works in a big stream as well, not vertical time. The stream wasn't filling up from bottom to top. It was coming down very rapidly in flood form and then shifting the sand in at the most 2 or 3 days, not vertically, but horizontally. Not time, but process. It's become one of George's favorite statements, and it happens to be true. Now, we're not just creation research. We believe the Lord has called us to do real research, but not just research any old how, but research into creation and all the things that come from it. Let's invent a rotary strata machine. Yes, there is a nice curved perspex machine made up with double walls. There's someone, oh, look, there's Dr. Diane there hiding in the background. And it's been a wet old day. And we now have this totally automated. Yes, thank you to the engineer who designed all these systems. What are we trying to do? Well, yours truly, John Mackay, had the thought that if the engineer, the water engineer who I consulted, who said, listen, it doesn't matter what the shape of the machine is. It doesn't matter how long it is, how short it is. The layers will form because the layers are already in the water. And I thought, well, if we have a machine where the water's not flowing through it, the layers must already be there no matter what's happening. Good chance to experiment. Get your machine, dump the sand in. And the water, when you turn the machine, is illustrating the presence of layers in the water. Look what's happening. Look at that. In fact, go one step further. Look at that. Now, where have you seen something like that before? We didn't expect this. We just wanted to have some fun proving that layers were present in the water. And then one of our geologists noted, wow, that looks like the Grand Canyon. That looks like the area I'm working on in Western Queensland. That looks just so real. And no, it didn't take 20 minutes. It didn't take 10. It took just the right speed of the water, and suddenly everything was illustrating the layers. Not because the water was moving the sediment round and round. The sediment seemed to, in essence, be staying still. Look at that. Now, if you've been to central Kansas and had a look at some of the hills that show up in the west there, I'm sure you say, I've seen that before. When you look at all this stuff here, it's a really fantastic illustration of not vertical time, but horizontal process. Big gullies carved in a landform that looks like it, well, you could have just simply taken a picture of that and plopped it down on back Australia, where you find these sort of little mini mountains all separated by valleys. Not time, but process. In fact, the thing that we make a theme of is that one. It's not the evidence that contradicts the word of God. The longer I was at university, the longer I've mixed with academics, the longer I've listened to them and debated with them, I'm afraid I have not heard any evidence for evolution. Not that I'm not listening, because I used to be an evolutionist. I knew all the evidence better than they did. But they don't actually have evidence that they bring up. So they don't actually contradict the word of God with fact. They don't actually contradict it with argument. They contradict it because they don't want it to be true. That's what Peter says. In the last days, watch out for men who will deliberately deny. Well, when you have a look, our geologic column that we're going to deal with tonight, we are going to move on to that in a couple of moments. There, see those words? Pleistocene, Pliocene, Miocene, Oligocene, Eocene, Paleocene, Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic, Permian, etc. Where did they all come from? Well, Permian you already know. Cretaceous you already know. When you fly from England right across, I remember being fogged in London for 3 days, and when they tried to clear the airport up, they were sending off planes in every direction. So we had permission, the relationship between East and West was a bit better than it is at the moment. We had authority to fly over southern Russia. And so we flew all along the edge of the Cretaceous rocks in Italy, then up through Russia. I got the best geology lesson I'd ever had. I could follow Cretaceous rocks. Basically, well, as Professor Derek Ager says, you can start in the USA, head to Australia. You can start in the USA, head to England, head across Europe, and keep going to the end of Russia just about. Cretaceous rocks are big. Permian rocks turn out to be big. I'm digging them up here in Australia, and they were named in Perm in Russia. Wow. In fact, when we have a look at the geologic column, we're going to do what Joseph did, take you to Jurassic Ark and sort of try and figure out where does the name come from. Because if you know the names and you know what they mean, you will avoid the problem of saying this comes before that, this has got these fossils, therefore they must turn into X, Y, and Z. Okay, we have Jurassic fossils. See the kids digging that fossil up? People come to our park to have a good dig, as well as many other enjoyable things. For those of you who are Aussies who are listening, don't forget we have our open day on September the 24th. It's free, but you must register. It's our opportunity to show you what we've been doing with your money and what improvements. Oh, there's Dr. Deinege. We have a group of grade 8s, I think they are, from one of the high schools, and they are learning how to put this tree back together. Yep, set it aside, glue it together, stand it all up. There's our remade tree. And nowadays, of course, that's part of the world's only open-air sundial made of petrified wood. And in fact, all around the actual edge of our little a dodecadon or something there, Diane, we have not only the indicators of the hours, but we have all the local rocks. It's a gold mining area, so if you can find the one that's got gold in it, you go for it. Don't forget, visit our Jurassic Ark. It's at Bells Bridge near Gympie, and the open day is free, but you must go to our website and you must register because the numbers are limited. But here's the dilemma. You see, when I heard that they'd found this dinosaur, when I heard that it was a Jurassic dinosaur, I just said, I've got to have one of those. Now, I know that doesn't get everybody like that, but can you see the head? Can you see the bones, the backbones curve around? Even in death, and the bones are separated, this creature didn't die by being attacked. It's got no broken bones. This guy, we set the students an assignment and we say, how did this guy die? And of course, you get the usual, something attacked him, he died of disease and all those sort of things. Meteorites bombarded him. We've only ever had 2 kids in the past 8 years who got it right, and they were both from farms. And one kid said first, my dad's got cows. And we had a big flood, and the cow got washed into the big dam, and it drowned. Now, do you know what happens when a cow drowns? Well, within a little short time, the gases build up in its body and the whole thing floats. And then the gas bag goes whoosh and it sinks. But by that time, the ligaments have started to rot and the animal blows apart. No, there's no breakages of bones. The bones may break apart at the joints, but in reality, they are inside a leather bag. That guy drowned, said our young student. He was absolutely right. But why call him Jurassic? Well, there's the man you can blame, Alexander von Humboldt, a Christian. You don't need to take my word for it. In fact, I'd encourage you, don't necessarily believe anything John Mackay says on television, because the one thing you can believe is when he says, God says, test everything. That includes testing what John Mackay says, what Joe Hubbard says, what Donnie says, and even when you want to check whether George has just told a joke or not. Alexander von Humboldt, he wrote an enormous amount. We know about his Christian beliefs because his biography tells you that he believed in 6 days of creation. But he had a puzzle. He wanted to know what should he call the rocks around the globe that looked like these ones. And they included the same fossils. Or the Jura. I came across that word in Julius Caesar's book on the wars that Julius Caesar was involved in. He had invaded southern Germany, and the wooded area in the south is called the Jura, and it's very famous now for its fossils. So Alexander von Humboldt was the first to suggest that these must be named somehow like the rocks in the Jura. That's all it means. And they've been digging these rocks up in quarries since the Roman times. Look, there's me in the Jura Mountains. Found some fabulous fossils over there. Well, so did the Romans, but they ignored them. They had no use for them. John Mackay does. Joseph Hubbard does. And there's one I brought home from the Jura. In fact, we named our Jurassic Ark because of these. What is it? Well, I came home from Germany and I went straight down the back and I got a living plant. See the one on the right? And I put it beside my fossil plant. It's a living cycad beside a fossil cycad. Now, whether it's bryozoans, whether it's brachiopods or cycads, John Mackay became a convinced creationist because the evidence shows Darwin did not tell the truth. Well, the fossils don't support evolution. He got that bit right. He said that was the weakest part of his theory. Then he went on to behave as if they did. And so nobody ever reads this chapter on geology in which he even gives you a hint about the truth. Well, October 2010, we had started to put our living fossil forest in. Jurassic Ark, because our fossils in this deposit are the same as the materials in the Jura Mountains. That's why we planted living cycads. 2017, our living fossil garden has come on quite well, but we've had a few bad years as well. One thing we've promoted Jurassic Ark is, despite the good years or the bad years, God's word is true from the beginning. Cycads and all the living trees and the dead trees have produced their own kind, and told you Darwin's theory is false. Darwin's theory is a lie. But Jurassic, well, the fossil flood logjam. There's no doubt about it that if you want to think biblically, the Bible plays a big part in that. God's word is true from the beginning. It talks about creation. It talks about Noah's flood. It talks about Babel and the separation of the racial groups. There's great flood fossil evidence. Oh, those trees there, we've had the forestry department there. They are southern conifer trees, just like Joseph was talking about. The southern conifers from South America are actually growing in England today. They weren't there when the Europeans dominated the world, but you can bring them back, you can grow them. In fact, I believe Joe's even growing some of our famous Wollomite pines now. But you notice something? No branches, no roots. They are simply flood deposits. They grew somewhere else, washed in here. But in 2011, we had a chance to experiment on floods. Remember how we started with our strata machine? We then went to a bigger strata machine, and we've gone bigger and bigger. We're looking at real experiments. Does our strata machine, does Guy Barteau's work actually match what's out there in reality? 2011, we were cut off. No way out. 2011, the flooding started to come onto Jurassic Ark. Oh yes, we name it after the Jura Mountains in Europe, because you can recognize the same fossils in Australia as you see in Germany. Oh, and please don't think that Australia's plants are unique. When David Attenborough comes to Australia and pronounces Australia's plants are so unique, they must have evolved, he's talking through his nose. What he means is they don't grow in Germany anymore. They don't grow in the Jura, even though they're still found in Australia. The rain stops, peak flooding. Look, our Jurassic Ark excavation is way underwater. There used to be 4 fossil trees there. Where are they now? We still haven't found all of them since 2011, but it gives us an opportunity of having another bigger strata machine, because this was a flood bigger than any we'd recorded at Jurassic Ark. Well, we're now 11 years later. We'd built a nice cover over our fossil shed. We'd built a big wall to keep floodwaters out in future. We've done an awful lot of work, and yes, it's fun. Diane, you enjoy going to Jurassic Ark?
I love it.
Yeah, fantastic exercise. But if you go there now, you'll see a special, what looks like a pygmy possum cage. It's covered in perspex, so you can see into it. It's a protective box. It's now painted black, of course, but it's what's it there for? Well, it goes back to this dig. You see, this is a group of homeschoolers. God bless you, homeschoolers out there. It's time to get the devil off the Chief of Education Department, and it's time to put mum and dad back and God above them. They're having a dig. They're having fun. They're finding something that we hadn't seen in 11 years. You see the bit of rock that shows up at this end? That turns out to be the start of a tree. And the kids did a wonderful job. We knew that we'd found it before once we found bits and pieces of glue about a third of the way down. This is a tree which was previously excavated. Keep going. Re-excavated fully in 2022. But something had showed up that wasn't there in 2011 before the flood. Can you spot it? There's the tree. It's a pine tree, an Araucaria tree, southern pine tree. And can you see the layers above the tree? No, that's a laying person. That's me, right? Can you see my hand stretched over those strata? Yeah. That wasn't there in 2011. It wasn't there in 2010 when we found that tree. How do we know that? Well, I have photographic records like you can't believe. Even on my iPhone, I've got 32,000 pictures. Yes, we store it in the cloud, etc. And then we've got tens of thousands of pictures from 1987 onwards. Wow. Look, these layers are, well, maybe 10 inches and nearly 3/4 of, nearly a foot actually, 25 centimeters thick. You see them there? There's the tree, there's the layers, and they were laid down in at most 3 days, hundreds of little layers by the 2011 flood. And Diane, you dug some of this tree up?
Yes, I did.
Okay, were the layers hard?
Hard?
Hard, yeah, were they hard? They were already solidified, weren't they?
Already there. Yeah,
they
yes,
were all...
It was hard work digging them.
It really was. Okay, go up closer. All right, so there's our tree at the bottom. There's the original sediment, the original Jurassic sediment, and there's all the new layers laid down in 3 days, and 11 years later, they are all solidified. Now, if you wanted to, you could call that thing an unconformity. I say unconformity because you might see there's a slight difference in the angle of bedding between the bottom and the top. The bottom angle looks like it's sloping at about 45 degrees. The top angle is just a bit inclined from horizontal. Now, when there's missing rock, we call it an unconformity. Now, if I wanted to use the geologist terms, I would say the bottom rock is Jurassic. The present one is, we could call it ethnocene, formed while people were there, but not by people. And there's actually 180 million years missing between the two. And yet they look like part of the geologic column. Well, we've preserved it, so you can actually see rock layers that formed in 3 days in 2011. In fact, I've seen this phenomenon all over the planet, but not while I watched. I know it happened because it wasn't there in the pictures from 2010 or whatever, but this one is now fully preserved. Thank you to those of you who donate so we can actually erect protection like this. So come and visit us at Jurassic Ark if you want to see recently formed layers formed by a stream that was going from upstream to downstream. So these layers, you can dig them up at one end, dig them up at the other, and you know very well that the stream hit the top end of flooding first before it moved to the middle, which is where this is, before it moved down to the bottom end. These layers formed from upstream to downstream, from left to right. They age sideways, not vertically. Let's jump to an even bigger puddle of mud. Wow, we're going to Victoria. You see, really what we're trying to do is, both for Guy Barteau's sake and ours, show you that this actually is the norm, not the exception. Well, there's young Joe. Wow, fantastic. Come back to Australia soon, Joe. We miss you. He's taking pictures of hundreds and hundreds of layers. But this is an interesting big strata machine, because it is a machine and it's formed thousands of layers. I take schools here and get them to work out how long it took to form each layer. Because if you go to Wyoming and you learn about the layers with the fossil fishes in, and they'll tell you there are 18,000 layers in one particular area, and this must represent vast amounts of time, maybe 9,000 years, summer, winter, summer, with fish in it. And yet some of the fishes, based on that sort of logic, based on the geological column type logic, would have had to died over hundreds of thousands of years, 10,000, 4,000, nonsensical. That's why we call it the geological column. What sort of machine are we looking at? Well, we're looking at a machine which has man-made boards buried in the strata. Yes, this is an artificial machine. It's the mine outflow. This is where all the sediment that was taken and treated with the gold removed is then pumped out the other end of the factory, and somehow this board got inside it. This didn't take millions of years. This took less time than the mine was actually operating. This is a man-made strata machine, and the water has turned it all into layers. Do we have a bigger one? Yes, let's go bigger again. There's yours truly. Yes, I do get around. Yes, that is a big mine site. Yes, it does take an awful lot of time. And for those of you who want to support what we do, research costs money. Costs Joe money, costs us money, costs Diane money. What are we there looking for? Well, we're there looking for that. What a murky day. Man, were we muddy and filthy by the time we'd finished, and the photographs weren't very good. What can you see? Well, you can actually see an old mine pit in the middle, surrounded by a new mine pit. But something interesting had happened. You see, the company had changed hands, and they decided to fill in one of the pits for safety reasons. And then they found a new deposit and started a new pit right next door. But they breached the old pit. How'd they filled in the old pit? They'd pumped water in one end and filled it with all of the debris, all of the filings from the mine site itself. And the water did layers. Not 3,000 years, not 3 million years, not 300 years. Try just a few weeks. You see, layers are what water does. They're still doing it with the debris from the mine tailings there. Do you see what's happening here? All these different layers from the treatment site. Can I encourage you to believe that water does layers, but it does layers sideways? I had to remind people over and over again, the little experiment they're given at school where they get sand and mud and water and pebbles and shake it up and down, and then the teacher tells you that's how the rock layers form. Nonsense. Rock layers form only when water is going sideways. Look at that. Man, you'd think someone deliberately actually laid that down. Well, it wasn't someone. They were just in control of the pumps. It was the properties of water. Okay, when you have a big strata machine like Noah's flood, what would it actually do? Now, we're going to do some sideways flow experiments and then finish off a section and ask you, first of all, your first questions. Then Joe's going to take over with some of his fossils, but let's take you over from 2019. Notice how we've improved our strata machine. The water's coming in one end, it's flowing that way. But look, we didn't touch that machine. That's exactly what the sediment did by itself. No, Steno was wrong. He said the layers always form horizontally. He said the oldest ones form at the bottom. Well, the oldest ones form at the top end and the youngest ones form at the bottom. What about the horizontal bit? Well, what we discovered was the layers don't actually form horizontally. The layers form parallel to the current. We form these anticlines and synclines. Look at that. Wherever the current went, if the current was going near vertical, the layer formed near vertical. Layers don't form horizontally. They form parallel to the current. Look at that. Now, We didn't shift the strata machine. We didn't change the velocity. It just simply did that all by itself. All of that is due to the properties of the water. Water forms layers that are parallel to the current, not parallel to the horizon. Look at that one. Man, a geologist would come along there and he'd say the bottom of this exposure had been laid down horizontally, then it was moved by geological forces, and then a big erosional force had taken off the top, and then it had uplifted everything, and then you had a new syncline form on the surface, and it was moved, and none of which is true at all. You see, layers form parallel to the current. Man, does that change a whole lot of geology? Is that what geologists need to actually see is real world stuff, not fake? And some of you who've seen this program in England remember that we used a real illustration. The bottom is a section where Joe and I were standing finding those dinosaur / plesiosaur bones up there at Bristol. There's the geological column cross section of the area from the official geology publication. Can you see our little strata machine experiment at the top? And you notice something interesting? Oh, the bottom one is supposed to have taken millions of years of massive land movement, etc. But in reality, you will find when you look at that, the top one took 20 minutes and the bottom one's supposed to take millions of years. I'm sorry, if you think the world was laid down horizontally and then it was moved around and all of that, and then it was uplifted and eroded and down. Sorry, the top one tells you need to have a serious rethink about your geology. And for those of you who are creationists out there who are struggling with Guy Bateau and all of those things, yes, I understand how unpopular it is. I understand how long it took me to actually get around to saying, let's do some real experiments. Let's check all the big strata pits that are happening in the world. Well, here's what we've done just recently. Then we take our break and give you some questions. Then we have Joe telling us all about, well, I think he's going to talk about more fast fossils and what that implies for geology, column, and geologicity. Fountains of the deep. Well, we've mentioned water. The Bible says God made the world covered with water. The Bible says he destroyed the world with water. But in that water, on the start of the flood, you'll find that the same day the heavens broke open and flooded the land with water, the fountains of the deep broke open. How can we duplicate that? Okay, this week we have our strata machine. Yes, fantastic. We've been working on this for a while. There's the water coming in. You'll see the nice flow at one end. You'll see what it's doing to the water layers. Oh, but look, halfway along, we've actually put in a new addition. Can you see the water coming up vertically? Ignore the cars behind the scenes. Any of you want to donate new cars to creation research, we could surely use them. But look, the water's coming from left to right at one end and it's going vertically in the middle. How have we done it? Well, we've put in some fountains on the bottom. We have water running along like it would have in Noah's flood. It rains, the water runs down the hill, erodes things out, runs horizontally into the ocean or whatever was there in front of it. But then it says the fountains of the deep broke open. The water that had been covering the earth on day 1 and 2 and actually disappeared when the land was uplifted is starting to come back out. Look at that. Man, by the way, can you notice you can't actually see much water movement under the water? You can see where the two lots of forces interact, left water from the left and vertical water, and sometimes the interactions produce phenomenal results. Can you see the water tree that's grown? I couldn't believe it. That photograph looks like there's a tree, but it's actually made of water and it's collapsing. You get all sorts of organizational results because of this interaction of movements. Well, we then unleash some sediment. You watch what happens. Well, there's our normal results when we get the normal left to right stuff. But now let's put the water coming from the bottom vertically. Can you see what it's done to the strata? Have a look at that. Look at that. You actually didn't move the machine. You didn't lift the sediment up or down. You've just simply blasted water in the vertical direction as the water is moving horizontally. Look at those faults. Well, are they faults? Is it a rift valley? Well, in reality, we're going to show you a video of this in just a moment. Look at that. You would, almost swear on a stack of Bibles that the land had moved. Well, the water has been moving. The land has been shifted by water. There's been no heat. There's been no volcanism. You have simply rearrangement, and some of the land stays the same shape it was. In fact, have a look at all these. Now, do you realize we can duplicate in our strata machine, and I'm sure you could do this on a big scale if you could borrow a sort of a 2-meter pump a tube and blast it through the sediment in a mine pit. You'd produce exactly the same results. The layers form horizontally? Sorry, we measured them. They form parallel to the water. Have you got that yet? You creationists need to get it out there. Water does not form layers horizontally. Steno's proposition was wrong. Water, it does not form from bottom to the top, or the layers don't form oldest at the bottom, youngest at the top. They form oldest at the start and youngest at the end. What a difference. And then you can cover it all up and say, I've got a buried undercut valley. And you'd be totally, absolutely wrong. In fact, let's show this video now, and you can watch it happen yourself. So we have our sediment pouring in from one current. We have a fountain of the deep blasting up from underneath. You watch what happens when the two of them interact. In case you're not fast enough, you might actually like to note that the heavy particles end up usually on the top of the flows, not on the bottom. The bottle experiment simply is fake. Look how it sinks now. Sinks because it's totally saturated. Exactly what you would have got in Noah's flood, which is purpose, what does Peter say? To catastrophize the world. It was cataclysmic. Wow. In fact, when you're looking at all of that sinking that's going on there, you would say this represents processes that took ages. Now, it took a couple of minutes while the video was running, and look, you're now going to fill in the whole valley. And, well, I'm sure you've seen rift valleys like that, but in reality, they weren't rift valleys. They were motion that was produced simply by the water, while all the other beds were soft. Well, let's move on to the next one now. Here's the result. Yep, I'm sure you could go to South Africa and find sediments like that. You can find them in America. You can see them on the islands off New Zealand, where huge geysers of the material have popped up from underneath. Fantastic stuff. Water does not lay down beds horizontally. It's got nothing to do with time. It's got everything to do with process. And you need to build into your geologic thinking the scale of Noah's flood. Why? Because it's not the evidence which contradicts the word of God. You see, geologists have a habit of ignoring God in everything, and it is deliberate. When Joe rebuilds a few things for us in a moment using his fossils, keep in mind that the real problem is not your ignorance or knowledge of geology. The real problem is a set of glasses you've been given to see them with. Charles Lyell, founding father of geology. Yes, the man who was Charles Darwin's tutor. Don't blame Darwin. He's as much a con victim, except he wanted to be con. Charles Lyell is the real nefarious unhero of the plot. His aim was to get rid of the Bible. His aim was to get rid of particularly Moses. His aim was to get rid of Noah's flood. And he has, with the help of many church leaders, absolutely succeeded. Can I challenge you? As Joe talks now, after we have a short question time, Joe's job is to put Moses back in. Are you willing to do that? Man, will you have to do a lot of rethinking. In fact, Donnie, you can switch me off. I will stop sharing here for the moment, and we can get Joe back. I hope I can get me back. How do I get me back, Joe? That's right, down there. I'm sure that's correct there.
That was a great video, John.
That was fantastic. That was some. I'm encouraging the audience. Please share this content around. The truth is important, and John, you're doing a fantastic job showing that the geologic column is actually the Ge-ILLOGIC column. So this is great stuff, and amazing presentation there. Joe, over to you, brother.
All right. Well, if it's straight on to me, we might as well dive straight into it and then maybe finish up with some questions a little bit later, as we're coming up to about on the hour and a half mark now, aren't we? So let's dive straight into it. And so, yes, we were discussing what to do for this program with John, and we decided that it'd be good to recap. We've touched on one or two of these issues before on Standing for Truth, but it's good to look back at the point that we've made over and over again. It's about a process. It's got nothing to do with time. It's got everything to do with the process, and that is the real key when we're dealing with this and we're looking at the alternative explanations to a geological column. All right, let's take you to the Natural History Museum in London. There it is there. Pretty big museum, very cathedral-like, and don't be surprised, the guy who designed it and really founded the Natural History Museum specifically designed it to look like a cathedral because he wanted it to be a place where he could put on display all the greatness of God's glory found in his creation, including the dinosaurs, which he believes were the monsters that God made. Sir Richard Owen, who founded it. Of course, Sir Richard Owen's statue used to be in the center of the museum. Now it's tucked in a dark corner where you really have to know where it is to go find it. The one who's in front and center in the Natural History Museum nowadays is Charles Darwin, which Sir Richard Owen vehemently opposed Darwin's theory and everything that kind of went with it. All right, let's take you to the Natural History Museum. Some pretty cool fossils and all sorts of stuff going on in there. And as you travel around these museums like the Natural History Museum, this is the concept which is really pushed, the philosophy that is really pushed. Fossilization from creature to fossil is a really slow process. That's where we started with way back when we started dealing with dinosaurs. Okay, here is an actual graphic from a museum, from the Colchester Natural History Museum. Step number 1, a fish dies and sinks to the bottom of the lake. This is the process of how you get a fossil fish according to secular museums. Step 1, a fish dies and sinks to the bottom of the lake. Step 2, the fish rots and only the bones are left. The fish is covered with mud. Step 3, millions of years pass and the mud turns to rock. Over time, the bone matter is completely changed into mineral matter and the fish is now a fossil. Okay, remember our Bible verse which we use. Test all things, hold fast to that which is good. 1 Thessalonians 5:21. A command for Christians, but a very practical thing to do anyway. Test all things, check all things, test all things out. Okay, come to our Creation Museum. This is an old graphic. We've got the Creation Research Centre now. But back when we started our museum project, we called it the Genesis Museum of Creation Research. And we had some pretty spectacular fossils even back then, including this one, which we still have in our museum collection. As you can see, it's well, it looks like a fish that's halfway through eating another fish. In fact, it's well known amongst the creationists. They've used these as examples all the time of fish which are munching halfway through their lunch. And we like to be a little bit controversial with it, because what we want to go is a little bit deeper into this fish fossil and start breaking it down based upon the standard idea of how these fish fossils actually form. So let's go back to step number 1. Do you remember what it was? A fish dies and sinks to the bottom of the lake. Well, you've got some problems there because the vast majority of fish when they die are going to float. They're just going to simply bloat and float because they have a swim bladder in there which holds air, and that gas which will actually bloat and force the fish to begin to expand as it begins to ferment, and that fish will float. And you will never get a fish sinking to the bottom and even getting close to fossilized. Now, it is certainly true that there are some fish that don't have these swim bladders, sharks being an example, and it's also true that under certain circumstances, the swim bladder will not inflate and the fish will sink to the bottom of the ocean or the river or the pond or whatever. We'll deal with that in a bit later. But what was step 2? The fish rots away and only the bones remain. I'm sorry, but you've got yourself a major problem here with the vast majority of fish fossil that you find. They are not simply the bones. I mean, have a look at this example. Forgetting the fact that you've got a funny little fish sticking out of the big fish's mouth, you're actually looking at the scales, the skin material, the fins are all in place. In fact, Donnie, if I can ask you to just put me up to full screen for a moment, if you can do that.
Absolutely.
Let me hold up a very famous, or rather a fossil fish, a pair of fossil fish from a very, very famous geological formation in Brazil called the Santana Formation. And these fish are so well preserved, you can simply get a little bit of acid, rub it on, and you will get rid of the mineralization, and you can still see all of the proteins and the muscles that are buried underneath. It was an experiment done by one of our team members a little while back. Beautiful preservation. So the first thing is, number one, this idea that these fish rot away and only the bones remain, complete nonsense in most cases. You can see here in this spectacular fish fossil, it's got so much detail and so much level of preservation. Now, in order to get this soft material preserved as it is, you need to bury this fish extremely quickly indeed. But let's break it down a little bit. You see big fish, you see little fish. What's going on here? There's big fish, there's little fish. Little fish is coming out of big fish's mouth. And it certainly is true, when I first saw this fossil, I thought, hey, this is a fish in the middle of eating his way through another fish. But take a closer look. Test all things. The number one point out of all of this, though, is that fossil rocks are fast rocks for sure. You simply cannot get them taking a long time, because time would destroy your creature or organism long before you have a chance to fossilize it. Can you see the bite marks in little fish? All along his back, he has these bite marks where chunks have been taken out of his flesh. This is not a little fish on the way in. This little fish has already been in. He's already had the munch, munch, munch and been swallowed down. But then something has so suddenly and so rapidly and so violently caught up big fish and buried him with such ferocity, he'd squashed big fish, and little fish has gone bloop and has popped out again. In fact, if you look really closely, let's see if I can get a little bit of a pointer on here for you. If you look really closely down here, you can actually see there's still a bit of backbone inside big fish's stomach, right? Maybe that's another fish example of one of his previous lunches. We don't know. But one thing's for sure, this isn't a fish halfway through his lunch. This is a fish who swallowed his lunch and been so suddenly and so violently buried that it's forced little fish out of his mouth once again. It is, in essence, vomiting, even though little fish hasn't had much chance to be digested. This is a slightly different example, though. If you have a look at our wonderful big fossil fish slab in Australia, it's from the same place, the Green River Formation in Wyoming. This is an example of one of our ones that are in our Australian collection, and I saw this when I was out in Australia talking with John and traveling around with John. Can you see the fish up in the top? What's going on there? Hey, we've got big fish, we've got little fish coming out of big fish's mouth. The only difference here is little fish is a little more digested. Yet we have the stomach contents of a fish. As it's been caught up so suddenly and so rapidly and so violently, it's been forced these stomach contents out of big fish's mouth. And yet it's been buried within sediment so extremely quickly and almost simultaneously as being squashed that the vomit has simply got nowhere to go. Normally, it should just dissipate into the water. But no, it's actually got nowhere to go. It's been forced out, but it's been immediately trapped by the surrounding sediment. Now, you think back to the strata machine that John's dealing with, right? You've got this strata flowing along, this big slurry of mud and sand and ooze as these fish are being carried along with it and then buried down, immediately being forced with this vomit out, and it's got nowhere to go. It's immediately trapped in the layers of rock. You are dealing with a very fast process indeed. A great fossil fish vomiting. Rapid rocks for sure. Okay, let's go back and deal with that point that we started with. Step number 1, a fish dies and sinks to the bottom of the lake. Now, there's your first problem. Most fish are going to float when they die. And if anybody's watched the Crocodile Dundee films, when he sticks a bomb or dynamite into the river and it explodes and all the dead fish start to float, you'll know exactly what we're talking about. Now, it certainly is true that some fish do sink to the bottom, but 90% of them, most of them, are going to bloat, they're going to float, and then very quickly they're going to begin to decay and rot away until you have very little fish left at all. Hey, that doesn't look like our wonderfully preserved fish waiting to be fossilized. Now, you've actually got a decaying fish which is going to rot away and disappear very quickly indeed. But remember a point. Test all things, hold fast to what is good. Because it is true that there are some times when these fish can sink to the bottom of the sea. A critique we started to get. Under some conditions, they said, fish can sink and stay on the sea floor. Therefore, they argued, the fish that sink to the sea floor can become fossilized slowly. Therefore, you don't actually need a fast, rapid burial at all. Remember, test all things. Let's do some testing. The argument, can you get fish fossils without a flood and or a catastrophic burial? Now, some fish, like I said earlier, do not have swim bladders, sharks being a classic example of this. But then again, sharks don't really have very many hard parts other than their teeth. So to get a fossil shark at all would be a wonderful thing and supposedly a very rare thing if it takes millions of years. And we find plenty of them. John's got some fossil sharks in his collection. Okay, but there are conditions, for instance, if the water is very cold or there's a lot of pressure, that the fish is not going to bloat and float. It is actually going to sink down to the bottom of the river, the sea, or the lake. And we were out giving this presentation, and I had a fish farmer come up to me and said, you know what, you're exactly right. We keep our fish in cold water tanks, and when they die, they sink to the bottom. And it's a race against time to get them out of the tank. And I said, why? He said, because of this. A fungus, which will actually exist on the bottom of the tank or the bottom of the river or the bottom of the stream or the bottom of the sea. And when the fish hits the bottom, the fungus actually comes up and grabs hold of the fish and not only begins to digest the fish, it actually anchors the fish to the bottom of the sea so that it can't bloat and float at a later time. And within just a few hours, it begins to take hold of the fish and destroy it. Within a few more hours, the entire fish is covered and is being digested by the fungus. And after a very short amount of time, the fish is completely destroyed. No chance of fossilization in the slightest. And it makes that very important point. It's got nothing to do with time. It's got everything to do with a process. Ask the question, would you get a fish fossil slowly, even if the fish sank to the bottom of the sea and stayed there? The answer, no. The fish would be destroyed long before it could be fossilized. It's got nothing to do with time, everything to do with a process. Let's give an example of some of this process. Harper Hill in Buxton, a place that John discovered ages back. I've been there so many times. We lead field trips there now. We encourage you to come along to it. Great research in the UK. You see all the white stuff? You see the white stuff which is flowing over the wall, the dry stone wall, and over the fence and the fence posts? This stuff is limestone. There's a picture of John back where he first found it. I came across it a few years later after John told me about it. You see John pointing at a fence, a wire fence that has become overcome with this white limestone as it's flowing down out of the cliffs up from the area near the university and research labs where it appears that the bacteria and microbes is causing a rather unique phenomena, and it's actually digesting the lime and redepositing it further downstream. How long do you say? Well, you can actually work it out because it wasn't too long back when they started first manufacturing these square fencing and the round fence posts as well, just within a few years, 30 to 40 years really at the most, for all of this white deposit stuff to be laid down. And what's really interesting is you get in closer and you start to see the layers upon layers of this white stuff getting even closer, and you start to see some fossils buried in it. There's the context. There's the university and the disposal site. There it is, flowing down into the valley where you can see the big white formation over on the right-hand side. It's pretty big. It's filling up this valley very quickly. There's an enormous amount of this white limestone actually overcoming this area. And it's fossilizing things, permineralizing them as it goes. Great big root systems that have become covered, not quite fully fossilized, but certainly covered in these white limestone. And then you get leaves that begin to start to have this limestone impregnate them and start to permineralize them. You can do PhD testing all the way up and down this limestone deposit to test what it's actually doing to these fossils. You can walk out on this hard limestone bed where you can get over to the fence posts where this limestone is beginning to fossilize these leaves all the way up to the point that, hey, they're becoming actually permineralized, fully fossilized all the way through. And the point we make over and over again with these fossils is it's got nothing to do with time, but it's got everything to do with a process. But the question is, what process? Is it the textbook process, or is something else in play? Well, let's take you back to the United Kingdom, and let's take you to Hunstanton. A great place. You've done so many papers on this place, and I've led so many field trips here. You see the brown rock at the bottom. You see the red rock in the middle. You see the white rock at the top. It's pretty spectacular and very, very pretty, and it's a wonderful place called Hunstanton. Give it in context. There's Norfolk. Bit more context. There's over in the west of Norfolk, and Hunstanton is just about there. Old Hunstanton Cliffs. Okay, let's have a look at Hunstanton. Beautiful rock layers, and these are the official designation of these rock layers. You've got the carstone at the bottom, named after the same word from quernstone, right? Because this is one of the only hard rocks that you can actually chop up in Norfolk and turn into quernstones, you know, the grinding stones, or turn into housing bricks or so on and so forth. You've got the red chalk in the middle, or the Hunstanton Formation, and at the top, you have the Ferriby Chalk Formation. All right, let's talk dates. The carstone at the bottom is supposed to be 109 million years old. The red chalk in the middle, 101. The Ferriby Chalk, 99. Remember those dates. Beautiful deposit. Great for fossils. You can collect fossils all the way up and down here. It looks even more spectacular on a bright summer's day. And find fossils like this. A great big ammonite fossil buried in the white chalk with a shark tooth and a sea urchin, a vertical sea urchin turned on its side. You see the layers of strata cutting through it? There's no doubt about it. Not only is the ammonite polystrate in the sense that it's so thick that it takes up many layers, but the sea urchin is turned on its side. It's not in a living position. It's been transported into place, and it's actually cutting up through those many chalk layers. Sharks, ammonites, sea urchins, a living fossil as well. There it is there. The modern one on the top, the fossil one on the side. Pretty spectacular looking. Okay, you also find these brachiopod fossils, and they're almost exclusively sitting upright in the rock like that. They've been flipped upside down. They haven't lived there and died there and got buried there. They've been transported there, moved into position, and they're a couple of inches thick. Pretty tall things. Okay, there's the brachiopod, and there's the modern one. That's how they're supposed to be, actually turned the other way up, fastened to the bottom of the sea. And yet every one we found there has been flipped around. It's been turned upside down. There it is there. That's how you find them in the rocks, standing up through the many layers. It's polystrate, poly meaning many, straight meaning strata or layers. They're cutting up through many strata layers. Okay, a reminder of our dates. The carstone at the bottom, 109. The Ferriby at the top, 99. Let's do some maths. 109 million years minus 99 million years is 10 million years. In other words, according to the secular sources, secular research, it took 10 million years to lay down that amount of strata. Whoops. There we go. 10 million years to lay down those rocks there from the bottom to the top. And Hunstanton is unique because you can actually find the layer that's underneath that cast stone, so you know for sure that the cast stone from that bottom bit of the beach up to the top is the full amount of supposed time represented here. 10 million years to lay down these rocks. What's the depth? About 20 meters or 65 feet. We'll use 20 meters. I'm sorry, America, but metric is just a lot easier to get your head around if you're divisible by 10. The point being, it took 10 million years to lay down around 20 meters worth of sediment or 65 feet. Break it down even further. 20 meters is 20,000 millimeters. 20,000 millimeters divided by 10 million, which is your time supposedly took to lay down that 20,000 millimeters, and you get a deposition rate of 0.0002 millimeters per year, or 0.00007 inches per year. Now that is a ridiculously small amount. In fact, it's so small that it actually goes, I mean, you'd never get a deposit anyway because the rate of erosion is faster than that. It would be 14,000 years just to lay down an inch of sediment, or it would take 28,000 years just to bury the brachiopod. We've got ourselves a problem here. Just to bury that brachiopod, 28,000 years. You wouldn't have a fossil by the end of it. And remember what I said earlier? It's been ripped up, it's been transported, it's been turned upside down. Nothing to do with time, everything to do with a process. Okay, let's deal with very quickly before we finish with a criticism. I've used this many times, and the criticism that comes through is, well, deposition would not be constant when forming. You'd have fluctuations and different layers and so on and so forth. Well, number one, that's not how you take it when you read the geological literature on the area for sure. It certainly does say, and I've referenced it many times, that it takes around 1 to 10,000 years per inch, sometimes even more than that, depending on where you are. It's written out there in the literature. Go and check it out yourself. That's the first thing. Secondly, let's get a big picture. What do evidence indicate about how these rocks were deposited based on the fossils? The Hunstanton evidence clearly shows that the fossils were not only buried rapidly, because you have fossils there, you find that they were buried rapidly throughout the deposits. But what about currents and flow? Is this a slow calcareous ooze which is slowly building up over vast periods of time, or does this actually show evidence that the fossils were buried in flowing water, much like you see in our strata machines? Okay, our first paper we did in the area, the evidence of transportation and rapid burial in the fossils of Hunstanton. It was a 3-month research project. We looked for evidence of transportation, that's fast-flowing currents, during the formation of the Hunstanton and Ferriby formations and the burial of the fossils within. This is what we found. 93% of the fossils showed evidence of transportation. In other words, these fossils showed evidence that they had been flowing into position. These fossils were formed in water flowing in a singular direction, having been caught up in a slurry of sediment just like the one you see in the strata machine before being rapidly buried and fossilized. Here's another example, this time from a different place up in Whitby. You see all the fossil squids, the belemnites? You see how they're more or less pointing in the same way? They're all showing evidence of transportation, having been flown into position, or pushed into position rather, by flowing water. In fact, if you want a great evidence, and I know that there's been lots of work done on the nautiluses or the orthoceras of the Grand Canyon, but I've got a better example than the Grand Canyon. Let's take you to Morocco and hold this up for you. You see all the orthoceras? You see how they're all pointing in roughly the same direction? Now, this is just a little handheld slab that we have for sale here at this convention. It's great evidence that we like to show people and give people. We have an enormous slab in our museum. John has an even bigger slab in his museum. And you can go to the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, where these are in their hundreds of billions. Absolutely ridiculous amounts of these things, all pointing in the same direction, all being buried by flowing water for sure. No doubt about it. It's got nothing to do with time, but everything to do with a process. And that process must be quick, that process must bury it deep, and that process must bury it without the presence of oxygen. And your flowing water scenario fits best to all the evidence that we can see, no matter where we go. I'm going to finish there, hand back to John if he's got any comments to finish up on, and then I suggest we throw it open to some questions.
No, my comments are thanks, Joe, and I really enjoyed the stuff from Hunstanton. And of course, the tragedy was you didn't get to hold up your actual specimen, so you'd better do that live so we can see it. All we saw was your PowerPoint. So where is your Moroccan nautiloids, please, mate?
Ah, right. So they didn't come up, did it? There we go.
Mm.
There
Of
it is.
course, that's not a specimen. I've got a real specimen.
Well, I know. I did say that you had a bigger one. I did say that.
Okay,
Joe, another great presentation, gentlemen. This has been very comprehensive. And as I said pre-show, Joe, I appreciate the featherless raptor in the background there. Very cool background.
It's about 10 times too big, but it's a good eye catcher.
Love it. Love it. Okay, John, if there's anything you wanted to add, or we can get into some of these questions.
Time for questions, Donnie. Go straight ahead. Then we'll perhaps round up with a couple of comments at the end in 20 minutes or whatever your time is.
Awesome. Okay, we got some solid questions here. So I will let's see here. We can start with okay. Princess Dog, polite question. And the question is, why did dinosaurs go extinct but not reptiles?
Okay, yeah, quite a few of the reptiles did go extinct. So you will find that several things have happened to the reptiles. For our open day on September the 24th, free ad for Aussies who are watching. Come and join us on 24th of September from 10:30 to 2:30. It's free, but you must go to our website and register. We have a very limited number of people we can actually fit in or allowed to fit in still. So I'd encourage you, go to the website, come and join us, and you will see our newest display, which is a humongous goanna fossil found here in Australia. And right alongside it are living the present day goannas, sometimes that big. I mean, my wife sees ones that big and she goes, ah, right? They're enormous in her eyes, but they used to be much bigger. So with many reptiles, they have certainly diminished. In fact, if you like the latest evolutionary theory, the evidence, according to the evolutionists, shows that our present day Aussie snakes devolved from those gigantic goannas by losing their legs and gaining a few extra backbones to swivel along. And so that's the evolution of snakes in Australia from legged goannas. Fascinating. But really, they used to be bigger. Now they're smaller. Some are so small they died out, quite literally. So when you look at the goannas, they didn't die out. When you look at the dinosaurs, they actually did. Couple of suggestions. If you want to follow this up at a kids to adults level, we wrote a book called Why Did the Dinosaurs Die? Right, you'll find there's one available for 3 to 5 year olds, and there's one available for 12 years of age and above on our website. They're both books. The kids love them, and you'll find them very helpful. But here's a couple of thoughts for you that you can take away. Joe might want to add a couple of things. When you are a cold-blooded creature, take our closest sort of representatives of anything dinosaurian, and that's the crocodile. Here is a most amazing phenomena. When you have a cold climate and you have these creatures after the flood, the ice in Job's day begins to encroach upon the planet. If you are a cold-blooded reptile, when you are laying your eggs, if the eggs hatch, and they hatch in the open air, remember, if they are too cold, you'll find only males are born. If they are too warm, only females are born. You are doomed to extinction shortly after. There's one contributor that's hardly even mentioned in the textbooks. You'll find if you're a big creature and you're a plant eater, then after Noah's flood, when you get winter and summer, I'm sorry, the minute you start to get hot and cold and drought, then unless you can sort of change your diet from grain to gerberas or to the animal that's called that, you will die out. So therefore, change of food sources will cause extinction as well. So creatures that are in the water that don't have to worry about drought, like the crocodiles and that, will stay alive, provided they can move away from England. Yes, you do find fossil crocs in England, but they only really live well in Australia today because it's still warm enough for the eggs to give a fairly balanced mix of genders when they're born. Joe, any other contributors to dinosaur extinction?
No, I think you pretty much covered it there, and that's been one of our most popular questions over the last few days here. And I really do think that the climate change is really the source of most of these issues, right? Hunting a bit on the side, but certainly climate change leading to the egg sex problem, or narrowing the amount of area that dinosaurs are able to survive. It certainly does seem to be that the pre-flood world, with its denser atmosphere and higher CO2 levels, was certainly much more amenable for the reptilians, whereas the post-flood world, with its erratic climates, mammals are more able to survive than the big reptiles. So it certainly seems to be that way.
Great responses, gentlemen. I'll pick another question, and then George will give you the honors of choosing one for Joe and John. So this one comes in from Doki Doki Bible Club. Doki, thank you for the question. Okay, so for the creation research team, how would you respond to a geologist giving up a certain geological feature to catastrophism, but then say that doesn't change anything in the grand scheme of things?
Well, he's standing at the edge of the cliff, and you just need to push a little further. You will find it's just a question of time.
Metaphorically speaking.
Thank you, Joseph.
Of course.
Thank you. It is a stage, there's no doubt about it. The minute you say the Permian was catastrophic, you've eliminated 60 million years from your geologic column. And all of a sudden, Darwin's theory starts to become doubtful, because you can't have slow millions of years of evolution up to the bottom of the Permian, then rapidly transit through the Permian to the other side when the dinosaurs appear here after major catastrophes with not much time involved. So his illogicity about the Ge-ILLOGICAL column will soon catch him out, unless he doesn't want to think. Now, can I be brutally blunt with you people out there? Our big problem in life is that we are sinners, and sinners want to see things our way. I mean, when I look in the mirror, I see a good-looking Aussie. Now, sorry about you people out there who can't see straight, but in reality, we deceive ourselves, and we are the easiest person to lie to on the planet, particularly when we are wrong, and particularly when we can see catastrophism here, but we can't see it in the next layer of the geologic column, because it destroys the whole geologic column, particularly when you realize the biggest problem is Charles Lyell's "I'm doing this to get rid of Moses" out of science. Have to get them back to that, folks, because put Moses back in science, God the creator, perfect creation. God who made man in his image, man who sinned. Sin brings all sorts of problems, okay, including how you see the rocks. So you have to get to there, then you have to get to Jesus, and the stones cry out his praises, and that's where you have to get to.
Again, great answer. I love the way you gentlemen just dismantle the Ge-ILLOGIC column. And George, I'm going to throw in one more question here, because it's kind of related, and I'm kind of curious.
You lied to me.
Yeah. Forgive me, George. This is a bonus question on top of Doki's question. So the question, gentlemen, does the geologic column as depicted in the textbooks exist anywhere on the planet?
I'll go in first, because I've tramped most of the planet, and Joe's only at the starting end of his career, and he's tramped half of it. You will find there is one, maybe two places on the planet where you can drill a hole in the ground, and you can end up with most of the names in the geological book. I didn't say most of the rocks. I said most of the names of the layers. There is one particular place, a well in Montana, right, that has sections of every major named group up to, you know, the surface of the soil there. But if you actually do what Joe did and say how much of the rock is preserved, what percentage of the geologic column in terms of time, it's no good saying we have 1 foot of the Permian, 3 feet of the Cretaceous, 7 feet of the Jurassic. It's no good saying we've got that, because that ends up being, well, okay, in the Grand Canyon, here's how much of the Coconino sandstone is preserved. In Montana, you've got that much. So you find that in any location where you would even claim to have the whole geologic column, if you analyze it and say what percentage of the rocks that could have formed in the so-called time exists there, the answer is usually less than 1%. the Grand Canyon is 99% not there in terms of time. Right, that's how you need to approach it. Joe, want to add anything?
Yeah, well, like you say, you've had a lot more experience traveling than I have, and I've had a large amount of experience nonetheless. But you are right. You are more qualified to speak than me, so I will go to somebody who's perhaps a bit more qualified in academic standards than either of us, Professor Derek Ager. And let me put up a quote or two from him, which deals with this quite nicely. Nowhere in the world, he says, is the record or even part of it anywhere near complete. This is the geological record he's talking about. Even in the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River and the adjacent sections along the Little Colorado River, surely the finest record of geological history anywhere on Earth, there are huge breaks. About the Grand Canyon, he says, notable is the complete absence of the Upper Carboniferous, that's the Pennsylvanian for you over in the States, and of the Ordovician and Silurian systems. Devonian strata are only present in local lenses. So the key bit is what he said at the beginning, nowhere in the world is the record or even any part of it anywhere near complete. And I think that's pretty much hits the nail right on the head there.
Awesome answers. Appreciate it. George, I'll hand it over to you, brother.
Well, before I ask my question, I want to make a plea to the audience. Come on, guys. That presentation deserves a donation. All you need to do is go to creationresearch.net, press the donate button, and offer whatever you can, because that money goes towards that kind of research that John and Joe just mentioned. Now, John, we all remember the Bill Nye and Ken Ham debate. I believe a similar question came up through the audience here about why don't we find canyons in other parts of the world. Now, I know the answer to this, but you guys can expand on that if you like.
Okay, Joe, do you want to try that one first?
Yeah, sure. There are quite a lot of other Grand Canyon-like formations. I know we visited one out in Australia, down near the Blue Mountains. Now, the difference was it wasn't a stark, barren desert like the one over in Arizona. It was completely covered over in vegetation, right? There's another huge one over in China. I mean, we don't have quite the same thing here in the UK. The closest thing we get is probably Cheddar Gorge, which, if you look that up, it's impressive enough, but it's a lot smaller. But there are plenty of other big canyons. It just so happens that the Grand Canyon is, by far the most well-known one. But John, you remember the one? I can't remember exactly the name of the canyon I'm thinking of, but we went to it when we were near the Blue Mountains, went for a hike over the top there. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's the gorge that's associated with a river that runs back down towards Sydney.
That's
so
right.
They're heading up to the Blue Mountains, and they go to the edge of the Blue Mountains. Diane, she's an old ex-New South Wales girl. Do you remember the name of the gorge that heads up to the edge of the Blue Mountains?
Oh, there's a place there called Govet's Leap.
Govet's Leap is one that's worth going to if you're travelling in Australia. And also, as you head west from Windsor, you will find the river winds its way up into an enormous gorge, cut through the sandstone at the Blue Mountains. So that's another one. And if you're a tourist and you like going to Hawaii, then visit the Hawaiian Canyon. It makes the Grand Canyon depth-wise look like just a sketching from a chicken scratch.
The other interesting thing is the Nepean River, which flows through there. It's a tiny, weeny little river.
Yeah.
It's,
they're having trouble hearing you, Diane.
Oh, sorry. I'll just come over here. Yes, in the Blue Mountains, the one of the rivers there, the Nepean River, at the bottom of this valley, is only a tiny, weeny little river. You cannot explain how that little river could have cut that big gorge.
Yeah, it's very impressive. I've climbed in and out of it along it, so it's very impressive. So forgive the American Tourist Board, but when you've only got the Grand Canyon, I guess you've got to make the most of it.
And that canyon in China, by the way, it's called the Ge-ILLOGIC Canyon in Tibet. It's actually 500 kilometers long, whereas the Grand Canyon is only 447 kilometers. So it's not the Grand Canyon isn't considered the biggest canyon. But just something else too. You can also find canyons in Africa, the Americas like Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Asia, China, Nepal, India, Philippines, Indonesia, etc. Even Europe has some. So, and Oceania, our part of the world. So there's lots of canyons out there. So for Bill Nye to ask that question showed his complete ignorance on that subject.
So in other
also the fact is that it has nothing to do with evolution, which he was supposed to be defending. He may think it's got something to do with long time, but that is so easy to demolish. You don't get big canyons if you take a long time because they fill in from erosion. Right. They don't form unless they are rapidly gutted by the water traveling through them.
So in other words, Bill Nye doesn't know what he's talking about. I'd like to throw this question in. So, you know, one of my own, you just mentioned erosion, John, and I'm curious, what's the best way to respond to these evolutionists who would say the reason why we don't really find the complete column is because of erosion? They'll claim that rocks deposited during one period would be eroded away during a later period. What's a good way to respond to that?
Well, basically, even if you could find them, does it help your theory of evolution? The answer is no, because your erosion, and those of you who like logic, listen carefully, erosion on an evolutionist system is a random process, right? There is no controlling features except the water runs over rocks. It's coming randomly through time. So your time frame is random. Your world has evolved by itself, so the life on it is random. The death of the animals is random. The burial is random. There's no control factors. So your evolutionary process is random. So if you have a geologic column in which the animals have randomly lived, randomly died, randomly evolved, and get randomly buried, and then there are gaps in it that are produced by random erosion, the total end result should be a random series of missing bits of the geologic column. In reality, as even Derek Ager and quite a few of the others say, the bits that are missing are exactly where Linnaeus would have predicted them. They are between the different kinds. Right. So the gaps in the geologic column, the fossil evidence tells you that the erosion has not been random throughout random time in a random process. The missing data is actually systematic, right? So it's the systematic gaps that tell you that the creatures, they start out as bryozoans, they end up as bryozoans. They're not missing evidence to explain the systematic gaps in the geologic column. That's the best way of dealing with that one.
Yes, staying on the geological column, and I love that term, by the way. We've all heard the stories about the coal formation occurring in swampy land. You know, a forest grows, falls over, a new forest grows, it falls over millions of years. But John, as you mentioned, I think in another stream, or maybe it was the conversations you have on Fridays, you've told us that you find polystrate species of trees that don't grow in swampy conditions. And even in the joggins, I've spoken to Ian Juby, who actually knows you and spoken to you. We find reeds in a polystrate condition in the upside down position. How is that not geological?
Okay, the term geological is copyright John Mackay 2022 with special rights for use on Johnny's program here. All payments should be forwarded to yours truly. I'm glad you like that word, but it's occurred to me for ages that we need to demolish even the creationists' confidence in this. Right, we need to totally change once we admit that Steno was wrong in his two basic propositions. We need to come to grips with the fact that John Ray, right after Steno invented his presuppositions, he said if Steno is right, the world is too old for the Bible to be true. Now, even the creationists who've been duped by this whole process are really duped by Steno and the geologic column built on there. They need to go back to saying John Ray was right. These guys, if Steno is right, the world is too old, and that is the logical consequence. It's not just the results of the rocks and the fossils, it's the consequence of Steno's wrong presuppositions. Okay, so that I need to get that out of the road first. So when you have a look at the polystrate, once you get to acknowledge that, okay, this layer has formed catastrophically, this layer has been washed in. That's why some of the reeds are actually upside down. Now, normally, if the reed will get a chance to float, we have it at Jurassic Ark, we have a polystrate tank. And what we do is 3 days before people come, we fill our tank up and we fill it full of limbs and branches and things like that. And we do that for one reason. In those 3 days, the logs will actually soak water up and they'll stand up like that and begin to sink. And you can see them on the day when people come 4 days later. Some of the logs are lying on the bottom, some are lying at 45 degrees, some are standing on the bottom, some are halfway floating, so that the normal behavior of grasses and reeds, and yes, John Mackay, yours truly, has checked them all over the planets. I've photographed so many lakes and so many dams and so many reeds and stems. I'm bored stiff of even looking at my photographic files. The grass and the trees and the logs on average behave. There's the log. It will start to sink bottom heavy. The water gets there first, sinks to the bottom, then it will tip over. That's why you can get some logs buried like this. But when you get enough trees washed in, now think carefully. You can fill up your tank with so many trees, there is no room for them to do that. So the other trees will actually take the trees down upside down, right? Or there's a seed head on it and the seed soaks up more water than the stem does. So you will end up with someone's upside down, but it is the exception. Normally they will behave according to the same way they do in the real world. The water soaks up from the bottom and makes the bottom heavier, and then it soaks right into it, and finally they will fall over unless they get trapped in mud, and then you can preserve them at 45 degrees, like some of the famous polystrate trees in Leith in Edinburgh Quarry.
Yeah, can I ask the next question as well, Donnie?
Go ahead, George.
Seeing you're asking most of them, but this time around, I want to share the screen just for the benefit of the audience, so they can actually see what some of the terms. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just share. And
great comments, John, as George does that. You know, it's my hope that more creationists watch this, especially ones that unfortunately have decided to defend the Ge-ILLOGIC column, because I think this is a real great dismantling.
Can you see that, Donnie?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, now I must admit these terms I hadn't heard before, but on-lap and down-lap. Somebody said, how does the global flood actually explain the formation of on-lap and down-lap? So I think that's enough of. Do you want that screen to stay on there, John, or is that enough?
No, Joe's going to tackle this one to start with.
Okay.
Oh, apparently I'm going to tackle it. Fair enough. All right. You will find it's interesting you say that you've never heard of these terms before, because the reality is there are so many different terms within geology and they change around all the time, right? Yeah. And sometimes even John can have a hard time keeping up with these things. And if you say, well, how do you explain on-lap and down-lap? Well, the first question, if a skeptic was to ask me that, I would say, well, what do you mean by on-lap or down-lap? Because 9 times out of 10, they don't have a clue what they're actually talking about. If you want the technical definition of what on-lap is, it's reflector termination on surfaces with greater dips than that of the overlying beds lapping onto a structural high. Now, most of you have just gone, well, what on earth does that mean, right? And even I don't get what that means. You need to dig a little bit deeper. Well, John actually had an example of on-lap and down-lap. What it essentially is, it's a geological phenomena, and where you've got successively wedge-shaped, supposedly younger rock stratas as they are forming over an erosion surface which has been cut in older rocks. So if you take the standard geological definition of the bottom rock got there first, the top top rock got there last, right? And as you have erosion build down and new sediment on top, you get rocks that are overlapping, and you have the rocks that cut down underneath that are supposedly the older rocks, which is what's known as the downlap. So you've got overlap and downlap, or onlap and downlap. Overlap is the term that I'd heard of, right? And what I did going through geology, it turns out that onlap is just the same as that. And overlap is a much more descriptive term of what's going on here, because you have rocks that overlap the other rocks, and the rocks that overlap are supposed to be the younger ones, then the downlap ones, which are supposed to be the older ones. Well, I'm just going to pull up an example. John actually used this example earlier, and we'll just dig a little tiny bit deeper into it and show you a quick example. And I'm also going to have to warn everybody that after this question, I'm probably going to have to head off, because it's now midnight here in the UK, and I'm up at 8. I'm up before 8 o'clock. We've got a devotions and prayer meeting at 8 o'clock tomorrow, so I want to be awake to be able to do that. But let me just share the screen and have one last quick little look at some sedimentation. Okay, we've been here before. I started off here earlier with the dinosaurs, right down at the Severn Channel, at the Severn Bridge, down near the Bristol Channel. There we are a little bit further in. You can see the bridge just above that yellow dot, which goes across from England to Wales. Getting a bit closer, and you've already seen this picture. It's John Mackay at Oss Cliff, right? And you've got some rather spectacular geological formations behind him. And there's also a load of old fossils there. Not John, the things that he's digging up. And there they are right there. In fact, John, I remember you saying when we first traveled here that this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you specialized in these fossils in your collection. These are the pecten shells. Some pretty spectacular fossils that you can find from this area. I mean, the level of preservation is just absolutely beautiful. But we're not talking about the fossils. We're actually talking about the rocks. It was a rather grey and dreary day that we led a field trip down there. And when I came down here with John Mackay, I said, these rocks are the Triassic and they're this age, because I'd learnt that in geology. And John said, no, they're not. I came here 20 years ago and they're a different age. And so we went and checked up the literature, and guess what we found? They weren't either of those ages. They'd changed again to a completely different age. Now, it does pay to keep your records. It does pay to keep your books, because you do find an interesting phenomena where the ages keep on changing. But we're interested in the actual rock layers that are there. The processes at Oss today. This is on the public information board. You see the red mudstone at the bottom, the green mudstone, you've got the shales and the limestone, and then the limestone and the shale at the top. And notice what they've titled it, the drowned desert. Yeah, definitely evidence of a flood for sure. This is the technical literature out of our old British Geological Survey book. You see Gloucestershire at the top, Bristol in the middle, down towards, heading down towards Devon and Cornwall at the bottom, and the red line is where we were, over the Severn Bridge. Now, if you take that red line and you do a cross-section straight through it, this is what you get. You see all those wonderful geological formations? Many of these are what would be referred to as overlap or onlap. You've got layers which are flowing down, and you've got areas where they've been eroded away, and you've got areas where the supposedly younger rocks have actually formed on top. Now, the evolutionist explains this takes place over millions of years. As you have layers that are laid down, you have seismic earthquakes and so on and so forth, which shove these layers up. These cause erosion, which cause new layers to form over the top, which is downlap and onlap. Can you duplicate this type of strata in our strata machines? Absolutely, we can. Come to Jurassic Ark, have a look at our strata machines, get them up. You've seen all this before with John. We'll flick through this quickly. 2019 Mark 10 strata machine, and look at what's starting to form. Look at some of the remarkable layers that are beginning to be created by water that is flowing sideways. You have no need for major seismic activity and changes and even erosion in order to create some of these layers. Hey, look what's going on there. Downlap and onlap as the new rock layers begin to form on the top of them. Pretty spectacular looking formations. Really incredible stuff, forming very, very quickly indeed. I mean, just some remarkable stuff. And there you are. Compare them one to the other. Yeah, you've definitely got it for sure. On-lap, downlap, overlap, whatever geological term you want to call it, it's not been the result of seismic activity and changes in the rock formation. It's been the result of flowing water, and it takes just minutes. And the real key thing that you need to recognize here is that water is great because it behaves the same way whether you're dealing with a small amount of water or whether you're dealing with a large amount of water. It all flows, it all contains layers, and it will all contain the same amount of sediment, or it will all deposit the same amount of sediment, whether that's on a small scale like in our strata machine or on a very large scale like a global flood. There's no issue whatsoever. So I hope that's given you a little bit of an extra explanation into that. It is something you have to go and look up.
Right.
20 minutes, you can make these processes, and it is a process. It's got nothing to do with time. It's got everything to do with the process for sure.
Well, Joe, it's time you went to bed and have a good process called sleep.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Yeah, just another plug, Donny. For those that like really short, concise answers to a lot of questions like these, Creation Research have a TikTok account, and you'll find these fantastic 1-minute answers to the questions you'll see pretty much in every stream we do. You know, I'm sick of answering the same questions all over again, but you'll find those concise 1-minute answers are fantastic.
Yeah, no,
guys, Joe needs to go to bed, and we've got a school to go to, so we are going to have to actually opt out as well down under in Australia, in Tasmania. I think it's gone really well. George, you did great with your dog barking, or was that you? And have a great night.
His dog was saying, "Amen, amen." This is all. Even the dog was enjoying it. So, gentlemen, go ahead.
Sorry,
George.
John, but people walk past the window, and that's just natural for the dog to bark at someone.
Yeah.
All right, we'll have to say good night, guys. We'll see you in the morning. We'll catch you next time.
Joe.
All right,
Okay.
All right, guys.
God
God bless. Thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. Okay, so to everybody in the audience, there's another 2.5 hours. This was session, what was this? This was session 5. We've already got 12 plus hours worth of content for this conference, and we're only in day 3. And I may be sacrificing my neck for it, but you know what? It's worth it for the truth. So this has been awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
Donny, one of the questions I was going to ask, but I know the answer because I've actually seen one of John's TikTok presentations on it. Is the claim that, you know, like creationists send rocks to be dated to these companies that do the testing, and they say, oh, you can't send rocks that are less than 100 years old to be tested because it's too erroneous. Right. Well, for a start, how do you know it's 100 years old? And secondly, John, in that TikTok clip, shows rocks that were sent for testing to the secular companies that were over 220 years old from New Zealand. We know they were 220 years old because we know when the volcanic eruption occurred. So what is it? Is it 100 years or 200 years? Because the rocks from New Zealand also had widely varying dates assigned to those rocks. So the claim that, oh, you can't send rocks because they're less than 100 years old. Well, hold on, these rocks from New Zealand were over 200 years, and the same thing happened. So the story keeps changing.
Right. It's an ever-changing story. And you know what? We've now done, I don't know, 16 to 18 shows with the Creation Research team. They are, in my opinion, some of the best, flood researchers out there. They really take these challenges head on, and they do a fantastic job. So, I want to encourage the audience to look into the previous shows we've done with Joe and John. We did just last year a flood boundaries conference with them as well. Irrefutable, undeniable evidence that the geologic column is in fact the Ge-ILLOGIC column. I mean, we have these rapidly forming layers due to the sideways movement of water. Okay, layers formed in minutes, not millions of years. I have no idea how these evolutionists can say these layers are millions of years old. Okay, and I think this is important too for those creationists, unfortunately, that have bought into the claims of the uniformitarians or actualists that want to uphold the Ge-ILLOGIC column as something that is fact or truth. But in reality, George, it's a fiction. Okay, it's the Ge-ILLOGIC fraud. And so, guys, pass this around. This was 2.5 hours of nonstop information, and it's about time the critics put forth some actual, sophisticated counter rebuttals, because I'm not seeing those, and it's because they don't exist. The evidence is clear. The truth is clear. George, any final words, final thoughts, brother? Thanks again for being here. You had some great input as always, my award-winning co-host. Final words, final thoughts.
Well, yeah, I just saw one of the questions about, is there any proof that the fountains of the deep broke out according to Genesis 7:11? I mean, I don't know if people have heard of the continent of Zealandia. It's all you see at the moment is New Zealand, but if you Google it, and actually if you share the screen really quickly, Donnie, I can show them where Zealandia is located.
Sure.
Just bear with me for a second.
As you're doing that, I'll remind the audience that this was session 5. Session 6 will be sometime in the next few hours. It'll be myself. I'll be giving a presentation debunking, the best evidence for evolution, quote unquote best. And tomorrow we're going to have Dr. Jerry Bergman at 6. And then right after, we're having the man himself, the myth, the legend, George Bond, and Professor David McQueen. They're going to be giving a must-watch presentation. I know George is all ready with the screen share tomorrow. So a must-watch presentation titled Amazing Evidence for the Worldwide Flood. Your screen is shared, George. Go actually.
Well, this is one of those evidences, by the way. You've got an entire continent there.
Actually,
okay.
George, can you unshare your screen and then put it back up? Because from my end, I'm not seeing anything other than, there it is. It's there. Go ahead, brother.
You got it? Okay. You can see the gray area is what has been found to be the continent of Zealandia. Okay, it's probably bigger than than Australia itself, but all you can see at the moment is the 2 islands of New Zealand and New Caledonia at the top in the north there. I mean, the Bible talks about the valley, the mountains rose, the valleys sank. Well, you think about that. How could that have happened? Well, if the fountains of the great deep came to the surface, there would have been a void created below it. So something had to go down if something comes up. So there's a great example of an entire continent that's actually sunk deep into the ocean because of that fact. So when you think of New Zealand, think of this particular continent here, guys. And if you think about, fossils and whatever, I don't know how many fossils you'd find in an area that large, but we'll probably never know because it's deep underwater. So I hope that answered that question. That I'm not sure who actually asked it, but Cornell Bonko. So I hope
lots of great questions. Yeah, that satisfied it for sure. Lots of great questions today, as always, guys. It's our goal to put on these conferences, but not a behind the scenes conference where nobody can watch. I mean, we want this to be interactive. We want it to be extensive. That's why each show is between, 2 and 3.5 hours. So we want this to be thorough, but we also want it to be up to date, which is why we're bringing the most up-to-date evidence for you in terms of this conference and taking audience questions that include skeptics and non-skeptics. Okay, we're not afraid of the skeptics or the challenges, which is why we're doing these live, and we're making it comprehensive for you. So I did want to remind everybody, though, and I'm very, very happy with Brother Benjamin's work here. He's our book designer. cover designer. So we just sent this in for publishing. It's close to 300 pages. I've been working on this nonstop for the last little while. I would say this specific book is about 3 years in the making. So you can see from the back cover, mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Noah, out of Africa versus out of Middle East, Neanderthal, so on and so forth. Okay. And this book digs deep. I've spent hours and hours and hours worth of, conversation with some highly knowledgeable brothers in the Lord, going over, Neanderthal phylogenetics and genetic entropy. And this book has some novel answers to common challenges put forth by the critics. So I suspect this should be good to go and published sometime tomorrow. So I will make an announcement. And what I do, especially when these books are newly published, like the ERV handbook, I like to buy them in bulk. So since we sell them over Amazon, the best way for me to do that is to sell it at cost. So I'm going to set this to cost for the first few days, which will be something like $8 maybe. And I'm going to buy a bunch of them because I like to pass these around, in my personal life, church, family, friends, so on and so forth. So I'll make that announcement. And then therefore, anybody who wants to purchase a copy, you can also purchase them in bulk, or you can get them at an all-time low price. We just want to get the truth out there. And that's the important thing with these books. Okay. We want to get the truth out there to as many people as possible. So should be ready sometime tomorrow. And this book will go along perfectly with the ERV handbook. So you have the ERV handbook and this book. You're set. And then plus our entire library, Matt's book, The Young Earth Creation Model, is fantastic. Anyways, with that being said, I smell dinner upstairs, chicken parmesan, my favorite meal out there. Wife's taking care of me. So George,
I haven't had breakfast. I haven't had breakfast yet. What are you talking about?
I was going to invite you over for a chicken parmesan breakfast, brother. So, so you'll see me tonight sometime between 10 and 10:30, probably closer to 10:30, since these shows have been going a bit long, which is fine. That's the way I like it. So, George, God bless you. God bless the creation research team. I'm telling you, Joe and John, they are warriors, two of my favorite creationists. They're doing fantastic research, real-time experiments.
Yep.
Destroying the geologic column. I mean, undeniable, irrefutable. And, it really is an amazing time to be a young earth creationist, to be a biblical creationist. Okay, guys, God bless. Standing for Truth, George Bond,
Danny, just before you go, the message from this particular conference is, from my point of view, is don't be deceived. Evolution is a lie. Remember that.
Amen. It all starts with debunking the geologic column lie as well.
Yeah.
So
and thanks for waking me up at 6:30. Okay.
Hey, the least I can do, brother. I appreciate your passion and your motivation, George.
All right. Standing for truth is.